Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm gonna start a new series. What if Deku's breakdown unlock God level power? Part 1. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Unfortunately, Izuku is quirkless. I'm sorry. Words poured out of Inko's mouth like a waterfall, but they sounded uncertain and hollow. Are you sure? Can you test him again? My husband and I both have quirks. Izuku should too. Her hands trembled. She hardly paid attention to what she heard in front of her. She felt sick, and her ears were ringing. Mommy, am I really quirkless? Inko pivoted. Her poor baby had tears streaming down his face, and his eyes were vacant. He was too young to have that appearance. Doctor, The doctor quietly walked out of the room and closed the door, saying, "Be honest with him, Mrs. Midoriya. Lying will only make it worse. Can I still be a hero?" She detested this. No, Izuku. I don't think you can. Everything. Why him? Izuku is a sorry person. Ah. Izuku made an uncontrollable sound as his lips and jaw trembled and his mouth hung open. He fixed his gaze on something that Inko was unable to see. Inko took Izuku in her arms and held him as tightly as she could, saying, "I'm so sorry, Izuku. It might help him feel better. Perhaps knowing that she is there for him would make him happy." She was unable to see his face, at least in this form. She wished he would stop crying, though. It broke her heart, and she was unable to ignore it. Sitting by the sea was Izuku. Close enough to feel the breeze, but not on the beach because it was littered with trash. One of the worst days of his life had been today. One man, obviously worried, stopped his jog and said, "You okay, kid?" When Izuku said, "Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks for your concern, though," her smile was warm and radiant. The man gave Izuku one more look before turning around. "Oh, okay, just looked a little down is all. Well, anyway, have a great day." As his smile faded, Izuku released his hand from the cheek he was covering and said, "Yeah, you too." It was stained with dirt and dried blood. Punches that explode hurt. The water always seemed so serene to Izuku, and it helped him relax. For miles and miles, there was only blue. There were times when he wished he could just sink into those boundless waters, sleep, and never wake. Disappointed in himself, Izuku rested his head on his knee. He was aware that was not the right way to think. They had accepted his application. He was practically looking forward to the entrance exam, which was in 5 days. The phony smile had now given way to a bitter one. He was weak, unremarkable, and quirkless, so he would never be accepted into UA. It was the truth, but he was being pessimistic. He let out a sigh. He stood up and started to walk home after taking one last glance at the ocean waves gently crashing against the shore. "Sleep well, Izuku," Inko said in a gentle, considerate voice that echoed from the hallway and through his door. He wished for the future while he lay in bed, hoped he was capable of being more. He did this every night in the hopes that it would one day be realized. He aspired to be the person that people would turn to and trust without hesitation, to assist everyone. He wanted to smile while saving the lives of those in need. He hoped that someone would take notice of him and value his work. He hoped that one voice would raise its voice in favor of his dream. Someone, anyone. He thought about everything and nothing as he gazed at the wall. His shoulders were burdened by the weight of his world. He let the weight drop, cleared his head, and closed his eyes. He resorted to hope as he waited for sleep to take him. Something more. "Izuku, good morning. I am your guide, Bell. Well done on waking up. From now on, you will encounter challenges, vanquish formidable adversaries, eliminate instances, acquire strength, and transcend your present self. Do you want to participate in the tutorial? Opening square bracket, closing square bracket." Izuku was startled awake and left speechless, with his lips half parted in silent shock. Wah. He drew in a deep, shuddering breath, taking it slowly and deliberately so as not to disturb a dream. The tutorial. The tutorial provides a concise overview of the fundamentals of your abilities. Izuku put his hand on his nightstand and started drumming his fingers to calm his sudden apprehension. My powers. The tutorial explains your powers. Are you ready to start the lesson? Opening square bracket, closing square bracket. Why, yes. He believed he might have lost his mind, but he was positive the voice in his head wasn't his own. You have been chosen. You have been given abilities and a way to acquire more as a chosen. Starting at level 1, you can progress as far as you are able. Izuku, do you understand so far? Opening square bracket closing square bracket. I think so. Is this tutorial replayable? You can go back and review this lesson whenever you want. Proceed with the tutorial. Opening square bracket closing square bracket. Izuku was twitching all over, saying, yes, please. He knew this was real, even though it felt fake. He didn't know what was going on or why, but he didn't want it to end. You can think about opening your user interface. Izuku did. Before his eyes was a translucent green rectangle, glistening with a soft light and surrounded by a tidy white trim. He opened his mouth wide. In your user interface, there are 7 tabs located in the upper left corner. Each of these fulfills a crucial role. Now you can look at them. 7 tabs were neatly arranged on the screen, overlapping each other, just as Bell had described. Character sheet, abilities, features, stock, store, questions, magazine. Izuku studied each one for a moment, then concentrated on the best choice. Character sheet, name, Midoriya Izuku, level 1. See Skills tab Class S, HP, 80/80ths, STA, 90/90ths, MP, 120/120ths, Blackout, 0/28ths, Hourly Health Regen, 8. 30 is the stamina regeneration per minute mana regen, 39. Attack based on stamina, plus 14%. Attack based on mana, plus 26%. Range of attack, plus 10%. Chance of a critical strike, 2.5%. Power, 7. Constitution, 8. Endurance, 9. Dexterity, 10. Intelligence, 12. Willpower, 13. Charisma, 9. Fortuity, 10. 0/50ths EXP to the next level. Izuku believed he now understood. This was his reality, but it felt like a game. Hardly believing his eyes, Izuku collapsed back onto his bed and gazed at the ceiling. At a glance, your character sheet shows most of the information you will need to know about yourself. Just concentrate on any one piece of information for a more thorough explanation. Izuku's gaze shifted to the HP line. Your entire life force is measured in health points, or HP for short. You will perish if this number hits 0. Suddenly, Izuku recalled something. He touched his cheek and felt no pain. His face was completely healed from the damage. Izuku bit his lip as he considered shutting down the user interface, and the green screen vanished in an instant. Do you want to put the tutorial on hold? Opening square bracket closing square bracket. Yes. Izuku sighed and forced himself out of bed, feeling both amazed and equally nervous. He felt that now would be a good time for a shower. Izuku immediately returned to work after taking a long shower and eating breakfast. During breakfast, he blushed when he realized he had been talking to nothing but empty air, so he took a moment to consider unpausing the tutorial instead of saying it aloud. Then, remembering that he had done that anyhow, albeit more, thinking through your face, than, imaginary friend, he blushed even more. Izuku, welcome back. Open your user interface to continue where you left off. He decided to go on to the next tab because he had found that most of the information on the character sheet was self-explanatory. You have to select your class or classes before you can access the Skills tab. A list of all the classes you can take is provided before you. It is advised that you carefully examine each one. Izuku already had a lot of questions, but he put them on hold for now. A list of 317 potential classes was displayed to him. He inhaled deeply before starting to go through each one individually. The task was intimidating. There were classes that were completely new to Izuku, as well as all of the anticipated classes and numerous variations on them. Glass Shifter was one that sounded particularly distinctive. He mentioned its description. Auto-targeting, or continuous streams of damage that can be aimed at as few or as many targets as specified, is a major focus of the mana-based class Glass Shifter. The accumulation of tiny glass fragments that combine to form massive explosions that rip the target apart from the inside is its primary means of causing damage. Furthermore, glass shifters are skilled at producing physical illusions that can materialize with a range of useful outcomes. Izuku was excited by the intriguing premise of many other classes that were similar to this one. Even so, Izuku desired something that would elevate him above the status of a murderous machine and make him a hero. He had in mind something paladin-like, but he also wanted something quick and adaptable. Izuku gave his head a thoughtful scratch. He kept looking at classes until he found one that nearly met his requirements. The so-called Star Breaker. As a dual-focus class, Star Breaker depends on powerful damage bursts that are amplified by a wide area of effect. Because of its slow attacks, strategy and planning are crucial to optimizing its potential. Strong, time-dependent movement skills and small healing abilities are also included with a Star Breaker, which can significantly affect the overall damage output. It was good, but he didn't like some of the disadvantages. Slow attacks made it more difficult to deal with villains who moved more quickly. Having time-dependent movement techniques sounded strange and annoyed Izuku. In a perfect world, he would want to do everything. He was afraid of failing to save someone's life when they most needed it. So he was looking for more than a little healing power. He kept looking, but he was unable to locate a class that was just right. Knowing that he was being picky, he reprimanded himself in private. In other words, selecting a class essentially gave him the freedom to select any quirk he desired. He decided to ask Belle a question that had been bothering him after he had read the list well over 3/4 of the way through. When you said I can choose a class or classes, what did you mean, exactly? You possess many strong and frequently distinctive qualities as a chosen. It is up to you, Izuku, to decide whether to use the collective strength of one or two classes. Nevertheless, there are disadvantages to taking two classes. First, you won't be able to select your classes, and second, the rate at which you acquire skill experience will be slowed by 25%. The idea of having his class choice taken away from him almost pleased Izuku. It would make the entire situation much simpler. However, there was a chance that he would be assigned to a class that he didn't want. Izuku left the Skills tab for the time being and went to the next one. Features. Power. 7+. 8+ is the Constitution. Endurance. 9+. Dexterity. 10+. Cognition. 12+. Willpower. 13+. Charisma. 9+. Fortuity. 10+. Attribute points not allocated. 0. Izuku was discouraged by how weak he was now that it was practically under the spotlight. Despite his weakness, which he was well aware of, he made an effort. In an attempt to gain strength, he had tried lifting weights, particularly after school ended. Izuku let out a sigh, then turned back to listen to Belle. You will assign your attribute points on the Attributes tab. You will receive 5 points for each level, with the exception of the special 10th level. In particular, this means that you will get 10 points for attributes rather than the customary 5. Check out the second effect on the Skills tab. In addition, pop-up trials can earn you attribute points. Izuku nodded to himself, committing the information to memory, and proceeded to the following tab. Stock. The following. Underscore 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 underscore. The following. Underscore 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 underscore. The following. Underscore 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 underscore. The following. Underscore 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 underscore. The following. Underscore 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 underscore. This inventory was invaluable if it performed as Izuku had hoped. The ridiculousness of this struck him, and he couldn't contain his laughter. You can store anything you want in the 50-slot grid found on the Inventory tab. Since these things are kept in a soul space, they don't weigh anything once they're there. Hold the item in your hand and consider adding it to your inventory to place it inside. Imagine what you want to take away, then hold up an open palm for it to appear in. At the moment, only objects acquired through instances can be kept there. It was even more ridiculous than he had imagined. He chuckled even more. His mother's worried voice echoed from the hallway, "Izuku, honey, are you okay in there?" That, somehow, made it worse. The laughter brought tears to his eyes, and his sides started to ache. This time, with obvious concern for him, Inko knocked on the door and said, "Izuku." Once more, he laughed. "Yeah, Mom, I do." Izuku wiped the back of his hand over his eyes and allowed the last few laughs to escape him. "Sorry, I don't know. I found something really funny. It's nothing to worry about." "Well, alright, but I want you to tell me what was so funny at dinner time. And then maybe watch a movie with me. We don't spend enough time together. Anyway, it's Katsudon tonight." "Great. And yeah, I agree. Thanks, Mom." Izuku stretched after spending so much time on his bed and wondered if he should tell his mother about his strength. He would need to give it some serious thought. Izuku sat down again and rubbed his jaw. He noticed one oddity in the description of the inventory tab. After stating that he could store anything he wanted, it added that he could only put items that he had purchased from instances inside. He had no idea what a instance was, for that matter. What is an instance? He asked, speaking to Bell in his mind in a way that felt anything but natural. Once you have entered an instance, it will be explained in sufficient detail. For the time being, be aware that they are places apart from this world, made up of obstacles to be surmounted. He scratched his head at the ambiguous response, but he moved on after visualizing a dungeon-like scene. Achieving level 10 will unlock the shop. You can purchase and sell anything that has potential value under the shop tab. For instance, instance keys, weapons, armor, and single-use upgrades. Izuku was excited rather than disappointed. There was no possibility that he would be annoyed by something so trivial now that he had a way to develop. He had set his mind to achieving that goal. Questions. The start. Get rid of your first instance. You are not allowed to depart until you have died or the boss has been vanquished. Bonus. +5 Vira and +600 XP. Izuku hadn't thought about dying, so his heart skipped a beat. Izuku asked about his fear as his thoughts raced through potential outcomes and he hesitated a little. If I die in an instance, what happens? In an instance, death is permanent, just like in this world. Izuku blanched and did his best to keep that reality out of his thoughts. He would eventually find a way to accept it. You can earn Vira and experience points by going to the Quests tab. Extinguishing life is another way to earn experience points. This is currently restricted to the lives of people who are inside instances. Setting your preferred quest to active, holding your hand out in front of you, and saying the quest's name out loud are the steps to begin a quest. The idea of killing someone made Izuku's face whiten even more, and he started to twitch nervously. It was far more terrifying to him than his own death. But he tried to set it aside as he had just moments before after taking a few deep breaths. However, he emphasized once more the difference between restricting something to instances. It was strange. Izuku pondered for a moment before posing another query. What is Vira? With the exception of instance keys, Vira is the only currency accepted in the shop. He was also interested in instance keys because, from their name alone, it seemed that they were essential to advancement. So he asked about them, just like he had with Vira. With the exception of the tutorial, instance keys are necessary in order to create an instance quest. Izuku swiftly went to the last tab after determining that he understood most of it. Magazine. You can write down anything you want in your journal, which is an infinite space. Izuku knew right away what he was going to do with this and was eager to get going. Already, he was picturing the satisfaction of keeping his hero notebooks in a location that would prevent their destruction. However, because the drawings in his physical notebooks were useful tools, he would continue to add to them. Izuku's eyes brightened at the thought of heroes, and he quickly returned to the Skills tab. He intended to record each and every class description in his journal. He would be able to learn more effectively and, ideally, comprehend each lesson more fully since he would always have the information on hand in case something went wrong. On the lengthy list, he began with the first one. A mana-based class called Soulcatcher uses the souls of people it encounters to call forth strong minions and give itself a variety of transient abilities. The quality of souls a Soulcatcher captures has a significant impact on its damage, and the effectiveness of a Soulcatcher's kills is closely related to the quality of the souls it captures. Additionally, because of their poor mobility and subpar healing potential, they mainly rely on defensive skills. Izuku guessed that the Journal and Skills tabs should appear simultaneously. It was surprisingly successful. Both tabs appeared side by side as his user interface grew. He went to work. It was a strange way to transfer the information. After reading the class description, Izuku would temporarily store it in his mind, which felt more strange than it sounded, before pasting it into his journal. He was going to have to get used to writing without using his body because it was all done in his head. Fortunately, he had a lot more class descriptions to complete. It was nearly 5 o'clock by the time he completed writing all 317 class descriptions in his journal. It had only dawned on him when he looked tiredly at his alarm clock. However, he was pleased with himself because he had succeeded. He could quickly determine whether a class was dual-focused, stamina-based, or mana-based by looking at its name, and he could also provide a brief explanation of its function. He needed to make a decision now that he had written everything down. The difficulty in making a decision was the issue. He decided to try something after going through his journal. Considering heal, Izuku tried to construct a filtered search. Suddenly, all of the classes that had the word in their description were in front of him, arranged according to the page number. Getting a complete count took him about 10 minutes, and the outcome made him feel reflective. In all, 92 classes made reference to healing. That exceeded his expectations, which made him think carefully about enrolling in 2 classes. However, there were 317 classes overall, even with 2 chances. This indicated that there was a less than 50% chance of getting a class with healing. However, Izuku was in need of a walk. He heard his mother's voice coming from the kitchen as he opened his door and walked to the living room. "Dinner will be ready in half an hour, Izuku," announced Inko in a cheerful and upbeat tone. Izuku put on his shoes, opened the front door, and started wandering around the neighborhood while lost in thought. All right, Mom, I'm just going on a quick walk. I'll be back in a bit." Together with the waning sun, a light, chilly wind helped to relax his shoulders and allay his anxieties about the days ahead. He enjoyed the silence surrounding him as he walked, which was only broken by the distant sound of a bike or car. He aspired to hero status. Regardless of his abilities, that was, of course, his ultimate objective. He hadn't even considered having powers until today. That raised the question of what he ought to do. If I choose to go with a single class, I'll be guaranteed the powers I want. Well, maybe not. Who knows how accurate the descriptions really are. I want to be strong, but if I'm only strong then that limits how helpful I can be. What if I know I need to be well-rounded? So, maybe. Hey, stop. What? Izuku was startled out of his reverie as he focused on the voice's origin. Across the street from him stood a man of about 60 who appeared to be homeless. "Look in front of you. Almost kissed the wall there, boy." Izuku looked away from the man and followed instructions. A foot or so from him was a concrete wall that didn't look particularly soft and would have hurt to slam his face against. He turned red. As he concluded his speech, Izuku looked down at the floor in embarrassment. Thanks for that, sir. Sorry to trouble you." The man smiled sympathetically and went on to walk. "No problem, kid." And a word of advice from this old man. There is no shame in doing what you can, but there certainly can be in doing what you can't. His voice trailed off as he continued to walk, saying, "I remember when I was your age. It's hard. There's nothing more frustrating than having all that potential and not knowing how you should apply it. Don't worry too much, you're on the right track." He pondered the man's words rather than becoming more agitated upon realizing that he had been speaking aloud to the sidewalk. Izuku really only aspired to be a hero. That he was positive of. Nothing else in the world was more important to him than this. He aspired to be the greatest in every way. He became aware of his selfishness. Doing a few things really well was perfectly acceptable. He wouldn't be the only hero, after all. Izuku had already decided. There were no bad classes in and of themselves, but he was wasting time and becoming inactive because he was struggling to make the right decision. This decision would presumably determine the course of his future life. He was going to make a decision. Great if he got the best result possible. If not, he would try his hardest to make the most of the hand that was dealt to him. In any case, he would do that. He had been, in a sense, already. He would not let this decision be a regret in the future. He would not waste the opportunity that had been presented to him to fulfill his dreams. The decision was clear. He wanted to help as many people as possible. Izuku's thoughts were mostly about Katsuden during the brief and pleasant walk back to the apartment. However, there was a faint indication that he was unsure of how he would explain his abilities to his mother, but that was incidental. Of course. "So, honey, what was so funny?" Before answering, Izuku purposefully stuffed his mouth with rice and pork. This would normally be considered impolite. He was not opposed to using all of his resources to survive in a life or death situation, though. He glued his eyes to the bowl of half-devoured food and scratched his cheek, saying, well, it's something. It's something you might not understand. Izuku. His head shot up as if gravity had just reversed with a vengeance at the sternness of her voice. Her expression was disapproving in the way that only a mother's face could be. "Did you look at something naughty?" What? And no, of course not. It's just. Izuku felt his face heat up like a tea kettle and held his hands out in front of him. He held his hands up and cautiously peered between them to notice his mother's face. "It was something that's only funny if you're in on it, why you know," he said. He let out a sigh of relief and dropped his guard upon seeing it. Inko crossed her arms and awaited his answer. "Yes, I know what you mean. I still want to know, though," he said. Well, he was lying. He felt that he couldn't tell his mother about this because he didn't know enough about his newfound power. "I was writing and lost my grip on my pen and it went into the air and it landed in my hair. That reminded me of this interview with All Might where he was giving an autograph to a fan and the same thing happened to him. He was speaking too quickly and knew it. He had to unwind. Fortunately, if nothing else, he was aware that his story was verified because it had actually occurred. Knowing too much about something can sometimes be advantageous." "Oh," Inko stifled a laugh. "Well, I'm glad something like that can make you laugh so much. It makes me happy to know that you're happy." Grinning, Izuku took another bite. He pondered whether villains felt this way after getting away with a crime. "So, are you doing anything tomorrow, Izuku? You were in your room all day today. I know it's almost time for the exam, but I think it would do you some good to go to the park or something." He was going to embark on his first quest tomorrow morning, so he said, "I am, actually. I might be gone for most of the day if that's okay with you." He didn't know how long it would take, but if he wanted to have a chance at the test, he couldn't put it off. He had no idea what the exam would involve, but he knew that if common sense and internet forums were to be believed, a physical assessment of some sort was assured. Inko's lips curled upward as she leaned forward in anticipation, saying, "I don't mind as long as I know what you'll be doing." He tried not to lie this time and hoped she would accept his reasoning without asking too many more questions. "Well, would you be mad if I told you it's a secret? It's just kind of something that's new to me and I wouldn't know how to feel if you knew about it." After undergoing multiple transformations, Inko's expression finally settled on gleeful shock. "Does my little Izuku have a girlfriend?" Izuku's mouth hung open as the previous heat came back. However, it resembled an active volcano more this time. He was in too much shock to react. After hugging the air and performing a strange worm dance, Inko decided to run over to Izuku and pull his cheeks. "Oh, my God, you do. I'm so proud of you, Izuku. You stud, you," she exclaimed. He remained silent and chose to go with it. This was by no means the worst result. However, he had the urge to spend the next 20 years or so hiding in a cave. Inko abruptly stopped pulling and retreated, adopting a maternal demeanor. "Be careful, Izuku, and if it comes to it, wear protection." I know. Before he could reply, she put a finger to his lips. "Trust me, you never know when you'll need it. I didn't think I would, but look where we are now." 20 years might have been too conservative. I mean, at 65, he could still be a hero. The phrase, Izuku, the senior citizen of justice, sounded somewhat familiar. He thought so, anyway. Inko performed a small dance once more before coming back to her seat with a huge smile that split her face. "Anyway, you got this, Izuku. And if you absolutely must sleep over, don't let me stop you." The remainder of the meal was oddly silent. However, the film was good. The time had come. Izuku verified his choice by selecting the Skills tab. Anxiety swept through his body, sending a shockwave up his spine. His fists clenched unconsciously as his heart pounded in his chest. He waited resolutely for the outcome of his choice, his mind racing and adrenaline pumping through his veins. "Your classes will now be chosen at random, and your skill experience will be permanently reduced by 25%. Classes being assigned: Void Mage, congratulations. Silent Monk, congratulations." Izuku stared at nothing as his head struck his pillow. He struggled to regain control of his faculties while remaining motionless and overcome by a wide range of emotions. He lay there for several minutes. His life's trajectory was now irrevocably altered. Izuku stumbled to the bathroom sink after dragging himself out of bed, his body trembling. It had never felt so good to feel the cool water enveloping his face. Izuku took a few more minutes to collect himself before returning to his room. He positioned himself on the floor and opened the Skills tab once more. Now it had a different appearance. Abilities. Class: Mage of Void. Silent Monk class. Blessings: get your first blessing by reaching level 10. Evolution: unlock your first evolution by reaching level 30. Izuku waited for Bell's explanation before taking any action. You can find your classes, skills, evolutions, and blessings under the Skills tab. Each has a vital function of its own. Skills are present in every class, they all level up, and each skill selected unlocks additional skills. A skill point will be awarded to you every 5 levels starting at level 5. Skill points cannot be refunded and are only good for one use. Just concentrate intently on the desired class to enter the skill window. All that sounded easy enough to Izuku. However, it seemed harsh to only receive 1 skill point every 5 levels. But he needed a more complete picture before he could make a firm judgment. He took in the information and remained silent for the time being. Blessings provide a range of boosts and are obtained every 10th level. It is unlikely that you will ever see the same blessing twice because they are all chosen at random. After achieving the necessary level, you can select only one blessing from the given list. Subject: Evolution. Unavailable information. Right pointing arrow. Reason: hidden. There are currently no details available about evolutions. It was strange, to put it mildly. He didn't think he could just make it appear out of nowhere, though, if it was hidden. But he certainly wondered why it was hidden. Blessings, aside from evolutions, sounded very helpful. He could envision a variety of potent enhancements that would enhance his skills and result in restless nights spent questioning whether he made the correct decision. Izuku wished he had made a stronger decision. That was one thing he liked about Bakugo, no, cock, if nothing else. When Izuku thought of him, his mood slightly soured. Izuku then chose the Void Mage class and displayed its description. Void Mage is a mana-based class that specializes in ranged attacks with high damage that take down targets as quickly as possible. Most of the Void Mage's abilities have the potential to be deadly and can make enemies stop existing. It also has a wide range of very strong utility capabilities. This description, like many others, seemed inadequate to Izuku. It was difficult to know exactly what he could anticipate. To be honest, he hadn't particularly desired this class. Killing wouldn't elevate him to the status of hero. He didn't regret it, though, as he had promised himself. He would manage to make it happen. Then he looked at Silent Monk. Silent Monk is a stamina-based class that primarily focuses on completely soundless melee range attacks. Many of its fighting skills are very flexible and have few limitations. Silent Monks can be skilled healers and are skilled at physical enhancement in addition to their aptitude for movement. On the other hand, a skill will end if a Silent Monk speaks while using it. This may have unfavorable effects. One of the few classes Izuku had given any real thought to was this one. Although it had significant potential, its primary flaw could be catastrophic. It also possessed the ability to heal. That in itself significantly reduced Izuku's anxiety. He went into the Void Mage skill window since he had nothing else to do. 2 circular icons glowed before his eyes. Beyond them lay a sea of billowing, impenetrable darkness. He focused on the first icon out of the pair. Flame of Void. Level: 0/10. 0% to the next level. Description: activate a marble-sized ball of black flame that, when touched, bursts into a tiny fire. Point the flame in the direction you want it to go to use this skill. For 5 seconds, the damage is 12.6 10 1.26 plus 3.78 3 1.26 per second. 55 feet 50 feet 1.10 is the range. Price: 15 megapixels. Cooldown: 3 seconds. This was a skill he already knew he didn't want. He struggled to think of anything other than murder that it could contribute to. It was utter devastation. Every skill gains level through usage. Some are evaluated on an individual basis and need special measures to get better. Damage or range will typically increase as a skill is leveled. However, some skills will instead have their cooldown or cost reduced. You will select an upgrade path for the skill to follow when you level it up for the first time through use. Additionally, please be aware that the skill damage calculation is predicated on the best-case scenario. Everything related to skills was simple for Izuku to understand, at least initially. He recalled the attack lines based on stamina and mana from his character sheet. The additional damage was probably coming from there. He quickly evoked the second option, eager to get past the Void Flame skill. Scythe Void. Level: 0/10. 0% to the next level. Description: conjure a scythe blade that slices its target, a meter long, made of the blackness of the void. Use your hand to trace an arc in the air that you want the blade to mirror in order to use this skill. 31.5 25 1.26 is the damage. 33 feet 1.10 is the range. Price: 20 megapixels. Cooldown: none. This was more in keeping with his desires. He could imagine scenarios in which it would be used for something other than killing, such as breaking bonds, deactivating a weapon, or setting off a trap. He liked it, he could say with confidence. Izuku confirmed his decision, having already made up his mind. You now possess the Void Scythe skill. The Void Scythe icon became bright purple and its level rose to 1 as soon as he learned the skill. On the other hand, the glow of the Void Flame icon vanished. The sea of billowing black engulfed it a moment later, leaving nothing but complete darkness. Izuku was eager to use his first talent. That, in his opinion, would genuinely prove that this was all real and not just a desperate dream. But he could afford to wait a little while longer because he had already waited so long and didn't want to pay for a new wall. He was examining his Silent Monk skill options a few seconds later. Pulse Blinding. Level: 0/10. 0% to the next level. Description: send out a powerful energy pulse that strikes its target and momentarily blinds anything in a 20-foot field of vision. Spread your arms wide and place one hand on top of the other, palms out, to employ this technique. Damage: 25 1.14 equals 28.5. Touches the range. Price: 25 STA. Cooldown: 15 seconds. Izuku thought this skill sounded great. He concluded that he could achieve the blinding effect without hurting someone because of the way it was written. Though not unjustified, the price was high. Overall, he could certainly see himself making use of it. He couldn't wait to see its rivals. Strike with Empowerment. Level: 0/10. 0% to the next level. Description: deliver a powerful, focused blow that creates a compact cone of force that strikes its target. Use the chosen appendage to strike the intended target in order to employ this skill. 17.1 15 1.14 damage. Touches the range. Price: 10 STA. Cooldown: none. For his present self, this one was very adaptable and useful. It was the least expensive yet and, aside from being ordinary, didn't appear to have any drawbacks. He could see how learning to fight effectively would serve as a solid basis for everything that came after. After just a brief moment of deliberation, he chose Empowered Strike. He didn't know if he would ever be able to learn Blinding Pulse, but if he had the chance, he would eventually if all the skills after these first two were flawless. Izuku chose his victor. The skill Empowered Strike is now available to you. This time, the icon glowed a bright gold rather than purple. However, the skill leveled up to level 1 as before, and the Sea of Darkness took the unchosen ability. Izuku had no choice but to wait until morning after finishing that. He copied the data from his hero notebooks and added it to his journal after further acquainting himself with his user interface to kill time. It was well into the night by the time Izuku finished. Izuku's mind was racing with so many ideas and feelings as he lay in bed. He feared that his power would be gone when he awoke. He couldn't leave his mother alone, he was afraid of dying. He desired strength. Being a hero was his greatest desire, but what if he didn't succeed? Izuku closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. He would be a hero. Early in the morning, Izuku woke up. Even though he hadn't slept through the night, he didn't feel exhausted. Despite his nervousness, anxiety, and overwhelming sense of dread, he forced himself to ignore it. He started by confirming that his user interface was still present. When the glowing green rectangle appeared, Izuku almost cried with relief. He quickly got out of bed and readied himself to confront his fears. In a flash, the morning was over. He quickly devoured his breakfast and was outside the apartment door before he realized it. He made sure to say goodbye to his mother before departing. He embraced her, told her he loved her, and promised to text her on his way home. He also mentioned that he would return as soon as possible. Happily oblivious to the danger he was in, she simply advised him to enjoy himself and stay safe. Izuku soon found himself standing next to a well-known river. He chose to concentrate on scouting the area and ignored the memory that attempted to come to the surface. The water was calm and there were no people around, at least not that he could see or hear. A meter-long curved blade made of dense, purple-tinted darkness cut a portion of the river in half as Izuku traced an arc in the air with his hand. It reformed as if nothing had happened in less than a second. Izuku, however, had seen it, felt it, and done it. This actually happened. He discovered a boulder. It was smooth to the touch and roughly the size of a small car. It was old in a way that no living thing could really understand, worn by time. Izuku squared his shoulders and threw a punch with all of his weight behind it while standing at arm's length. Not even the trees could hear the blow as it landed, and his fist was surrounded by a warm glow. The boulder's surface cracked. Izuku chuckled. Izuku went into the Quests tab and made his quest active before he could change his mind. Then, with his right hand extended in front of him, he said, "The beginning." In front of him, a portal that was as tall and wide as a door and as green as his user interface materialized. With a thumping heart, Izuku strode boldly into the unknown. In actuality, it was only the beginning. Izuku was in a dimly lit room with sconces flickering. An oppressive atmosphere muddied their low burning flames. There were sharp ridges and bumps all over the floor and walls, which were made of natural stone. Izuku remarked absently that this was the most humid place he had ever been because the air was almost damp. Izuku had questioned Bell about turning on a heads-up display the day before, while he had been waiting for nightfall. In fact, he could, and he did it by flipping a switch in his mind. He switched it on, thinking it might be useful. In the upper left corner of his vision, 4 bars emerged. HP, 80/80ths. STA, 90/90ths. MP, 120/120ths. Blackout, 0/28ths. Izuku stepped forward apprehensively, then heard a slight sound in the distance. It resembled a rough, protracted stone scraping. Izuku followed the sound slowly, his entire body tensed, and he came to a small opening around a corner. He could make out a strange-looking creature beyond it. He wondered how it could possibly exist after giving it a closer look. It should not have been able to move due to its emaciated body and distorted, crooked spine. Its skeletal hands were topped by jagged nails that looked brittle, and one arm extended from the solar plexus and the other from the middle of its chest. He knew it was nearly impossible for the creature to have a brain because of how sunken in and concave its face was. There was only one feature on this face, a wide mouth framed by dry, wispy skin. Izuku began to shake in fear and confusion at the sight of its features. It was nothing compared to the worst quirk mutation he had ever witnessed. Izuku backed up slowly and cautiously, terrified, until the creature was out of sight. Izuku backed up slowly until he was up against the wall. Then he slid down into a sitting position, his legs like jelly. He had just seen something eerie. Even though he knew he would have nightmares in the future, he knew that in order to survive, he would have to kill it. He was hit by that realization like a ton of bricks. His breathing became harder and harder every second as he tensed up. He inhaled air more quickly, then even more quickly. He was hyperventilating before he realized it. When his lungs spasmed violently, the air felt thin to his lips. His limbs became heavy as darkness crept into the corners of his vision. Its head looked as if molten magma had been poured onto a thin steel ball, like an old balloon being compressed by a hand. Wisps of dead, crusty skin. Something scraping on the chilly floor, the outline of a cursed, empty life. Izuku was immobile due to static singing in his head. He was completely immobile. When no one was speaking, why was it so loud? He remained there for minutes, but it seemed like hours to Izuku. He barely noticed his fetal position or his tear-stained cheeks when his conscious mind eventually took over. Izuku compelled himself to relax. He was unable to give up. This was his first move, and he would stop at nothing to accomplish his objective. However, it was challenging, to the extent that he was struggling to get off his spot on the chilly, uneven ground. He remained seated until his trembling stopped. He knew he couldn't wait around any longer, even if it had taken an hour or a few more minutes. He hesitated for a second, then stumbled to his feet. He resumed where he had left off a few seconds later. The creature was still there, wandering aimlessly around a tiny enclosure. Gazing downward, Izuku associated the scraping noise with its feet. Its skeletal legs, which dragged behind its upper half, had 2 talon-like toes that hardly seemed to register as a part of its body in its mind, if it had one at all. As the creature moved, he noticed that one leg was less developed than the other, leaving a sticky residue in its wake. Izuku's brain began to function once he was able to accept the situation. A faint, blood-red health bar that hung over the entity's head, like his own, was something significant that he had not yet noticed. There was a name tag on top of the health bar. Level 1. Blighted Husk. HP. 40/40ths. Izuku made the unfortunate choice and entered the enclosure where the husk was kept, balling his hands into fists. Hello. Its body twisted wildly, pulsing like a mass of worms, and the husk's head snapped toward him. Izuku's skin crawled when a single sound, thin, sharp, and distinctly malevolent, came out of its wide mouth. It started charging as quickly as it could toward him, which was terrifying despite being mercifully slow. Backpedaling, Izuku had no idea what else to do. His feet fell out from under him as he stumbled on a pile of stone in a panic. He extended his hands to cushion the blow before slamming into the floor. Although it was successful, his circumstances did not get better. Nearing him, the husk's uncanny motion sent a wave of instinctual terror through his body. Izuku raised one hand and traced an arc, severing the husk's legs at the thigh with a blade of darkness. The creature fell forward onto Izuku, causing yellowish-red fluid to spurt from the wound. When the husk's hands and nails started to tear at his abdomen, tearing his body apart, he screamed in pain. Before he could do anything, Izuku's vision's health bar dropped by 20 points. Izuku, filled with empowered strike, pounded his knee hard into the husk's stomach out of fear for his life. Unfortunately, the attack only jostled the creature. The skill had failed to trigger because Izuku was in so much pain that he was unable to stop making noise. He had bloody furrows running down his stomach from the husk's claws digging deeper. He had lost another 25 points. Izuku bit his lip in excruciating pain and with adrenaline rushing through him, forcing himself to keep quiet. His knee became lodged in the center of the husk a moment later. There was an impact he could feel, but it was odd, and it was not definitive. When the husk's bones broke and its body shot skyward, there was no tremor that went up his leg. No, he only experienced a drab feeling that was drowned out by total quiet. Blighted Husk. Level 1 plus 6 XP, you have defeated him. Izuku fell, his head landing on the uneven ground and his arms dropping to his sides. Izuku felt a dampness accumulating in his eyes, his breaths coming in irregular gasps and his blood pooling at his midsection. The unshed tears were wiped away when a hand was placed in front of his face. He was unable to cry once more. Not in this place. Izuku was upset. Just 6 points. For 6 pitiful points, he had killed a walking nightmare and endured a tortuous near-death experience. He had taken a life, and his flesh and shirt were in ruins. But Izuku didn't feel like a hero, and that wasn't why he was upset. He would have curled back into a ball at that very moment if he could have. Unfortunately, the additional pain would have been too much for him to handle. He lay there for nearly 6 hours. Izuku pondered whether time moved in an instance in the same manner as it did outside. All the time he lay sprawled out on the cold stone, that thought accompanied him and frightened him. He was eager to get home. His HP eventually reached full. He felt the dried blood on his stomach crack and drop to the floor as he started to stand up, exposing a layer of congealed blood underneath. Izuku quickly and as efficiently as possible swept the blood from his body with his hands. There was fresh, unblemished skin underneath. He was astounded that there was no sign of the harm he had suffered. He pondered absently what would happen if he were to lose a limb. He used it after realizing he had the ideal source to find the solution. Would my arm come back if it got removed from my body? Any significant appendage that is completely detached from the host will not be able to grow back. Arms, legs, hands, feet, fingers, toes, and the head are all included in this. Izuku felt incredibly fortunate to be completely unharmed. He had little chance of realizing his dream if he lost a limb. With a heavy sigh, he decided to exercise greater caution going forward. He focused on the bottom bar of his HUD before moving farther into the cave-like instance. Blackout. 3/28. The only thing that was as important as HP was blackout. It would almost certainly result in his premature death if it filled up completely while he was in a life or death situation. He had to watch it closely at all times, no matter what. He remembered the harshness of its description. The amount of pain and/or effort you can endure before losing consciousness is measured by blackout. Your blackout threshold is this. This threshold will be reached more quickly if your health is worse and your pain is more severe. On the other hand, your efforts manifest as MP and STA expenditures. Both of these will start to increase your blackout threshold if they drop below 30%. Your threshold will be reached more quickly the lower they go, just like with health. Lastly, you will start to feel more worn out and your accumulated blackout total will decrease more slowly the closer your blackout bar gets to full. He had to make an effort to never forget the harsh limiter. Izuku walked out of the room that smelled of blood and decaying flesh, his mind bursting with wandering thoughts. All he could hope was that the next thing he had to deal with wouldn't be as awful as the husk. Izuku moved light-footed through a small hallway that was only illuminated by the occasional flickering light fixture. It was lengthy, and he nearly lost his cool when he heard a distant sound start to reverberate through the small room. The walls seemed to be closing in on him. Fortunately, he discovered an opening before his fear could overcome him. Izuku's hopes were crushed as he peered into a dark enclosure. 3 husks idly dragged themselves from one spot to another, occasionally pausing for no apparent reason before continuing their never-ending journey toward nothing. Not every husk had the same appearance, he observed. One of the animals in front of him had 2 underdeveloped legs, and another's chest hand was missing fingers. One last one was pathetically dragging itself along the floor with its skeletal arms, completely missing its right leg. He could sense his own breathing quickening. It was simply too terrible. Izuku centered himself on his home before he suddenly caught their attention. He closed his eyes and visualized coming home to a hot meal in his anxious mother's embrace. He imagined her anxiously scouring for information about his date and worrying about everything. He adored his mother. Izuku smiled shakily, trying to remind himself that he would be all right and to bring his attention back to the here and now. He took a closer look at the husks and selected his first target. With 60 horsepower, one of the 2 husks on their feet was level 2. Izuku raised his hand, steeling himself, and then slashed it down diagonally. A black blade cut through the air, and for a brief moment there was a deep, silent hum. The level 2 husk in front of him had one arm cut off at the wrist and its torso had sustained a huge gash. All 3 abominations turned toward him when they sensed movement. Another scythe of darkness ripped into the already damaged husk before they could advance any farther. Its spine was broken almost in 2, and its body fell over itself like a folding chair. Blighted Husk. Level 2 + 1 XP you have defeated. He was very cautious about using too much mana at once because he was already down a third of it. Izuku made his decision in the few seconds he had available. He found the grounded husk and severed its arms with a third void scythe. Even though only one was entirely eliminated, it was sufficient to make the movement of the husk inconsequential. Izuku raised his hands, turning his attention to the lingering threat. With twisted movements, the husk lunged at Izuku, doing its best to dig its nails into his soft flesh, quickly closing the remaining distance between them. Anticipating this, he swiftly retreated just out of range before charging forward with a coated fist from an empowered strike. As his knuckles struck the husk's face with the force of a sledgehammer, there was an unreal silence. Its head hit the ground with a loud smack, full of downward momentum. In a vicious stomp on the creature's head, Izuku empowered his foot and brought it down before the husk could recover. He felt as though he had stepped on a pillow. Its face drooped even more inward than it normally would have, and there was no crunch. It wasn't dead, though. As one of the husk's hands seized his ankle and tore at his flesh and tissue, he yelled aloud. In a desperate attempt to stay upright, Izuku planted his other leg behind him and got ready to strike the husk's head with his fist one last time. Izuku felt his ankle bone being scraped away before he could do so, and his talus was dug into like a fossil, sending a blast of hot, burning pain through his body. The husk's fingers had ripped through the thin layer of flesh covering the outside of his ankle, and he was horrified to see that they were now trying to get even deeper. Izuku's fist struck the husk's skull in a single motion, causing it to collapse like a rotting pumpkin. Blighted Husk. Level 1 + 6 XP you have defeated him. With a strong yank, Izuku wrenched his foot from the corpse's hold while hissing through his teeth. Anguish set in as soon as he attempted to place weight on it. With a grunt, he almost fell to the floor. He took a deep breath and slowly focused his attention on a soft sound. Without self-preservation, one hand struggled to wear its fingers down to the nubs, drawing itself and, consequently, the remainder of the husk, in the direction of Izuku. He ended its sorrowful existence with a single motion and a burst of darkness. Blighted Husk. Level 1 + 6 XP you have defeated him. Izuku threw his hands over his ankle to shield it from the air and fell in a heap. His physical discomfort subsided, but he was struggling to maintain his composure. Izuku sat down a short distance down the passage and dragged himself back the way he came. He couldn't stand being in the same room as a corpse once more. Izuku kneaded his brow in frustration as he sat against a slanted wall. Every time he was injured, he had to recover or risk further harm because the damage he had sustained was completely avoidable. The worst part was that it took a long time to heal, and in his current circumstances, time was of the essence. Pent-up emotion made Izuku snarl, raise a trembling fist, and consider putting his problems on the wall. His jaw tightened and his teeth creaked, and he had to force himself not to scream as a sense of helplessness filled his whole being. A deep rumbling sound escaped from his throat, suggesting impending violence as it filled the small hallway. His face was flushed and his pulse was rapidly accelerating as he prepared to attack. He didn't care if he broke his hand. His sudden emotion faded as fast as it had appeared. Izuku let his tense arm drop and looked up at the ceiling while taking deep breaths. I will make it out of here. This was the most irate he had ever been. He couldn't help but feel overpowered and unprepared for everything that was thrown at him at once. Ultimately, he was taking lives in an effort to gain strength. That was the act of a villain. Izuku rubbed his hands over his eyes and said he would make it up to, well, everyone. He would save 10 times as many lives as he would kill. There was a hollow laugh. Who was he to make fun of? He knew he couldn't keep that promise. Izuku felt more empty than ever. The pace of time was glacial. This made him grateful for his user interface because it prevented him from thinking negative thoughts. Izuku was able to change his mindset to one that was more analytical thanks to the green screen that appeared in front of him and the objective, simple black text. So Izuku sat in the dark, gloomy corridor, surrounded by stifling stone, and analyzed his development. Character sheet, 29/50ths expressed to the next level. He reasoned that he would reach level 2 after one more encounter. However, it was difficult to feel excited because of. He let out a sigh. He went to the Skills tab and examined the development of his skills. Scythe Void, level 1/10, 40% to the next level. Izuku remembered using Void Scythe 5 times, assuming that his initial use on the river had not been taken into account for his current advancement. After a minute of calculation, he concluded that in order to level the ability, he would need to use the skill 12.5 times, or 13 times rounded up. That was his best guess for the moment, but there might be other factors. Strike with Empowerment, level 1/10, 32% to the next level. Izuku discovered that the number of uses needed to level Empowered Strike was the same as that of Void Scythe, assuming that the skill would only level when used in a combat situation. Armed with this information, he exited the Skills tab and went to the journal. He reasoned that by writing down everything he was thinking and feeling right now, he might be able to relieve some of the heavy burden. His first journal entry would serve as a reminder to his future self that things could get worse and that he must keep going in spite of all the challenges life presents. Izuku's foot eventually recovered completely. Fortunately, he was up in less than half the time because the damage to his ankle had been far less severe than what had happened to his stomach earlier. He paused as he got up to look at his blackout bar. Blackout. 7/28. It was concerning that the bar was making unwelcome progress. However, he had to wait much longer than he wanted to in order to get rid of it, so he kept going. Izuku noticed that his body and mind were becoming exhausted as he moved, but this could have been more a result of the exhausting day he had already had than of his blackout threshold approaching. In any event, his throat was dry and he was starting to feel hungry. He had somehow forgotten to pack food for the trip in his excitement and haste. Izuku hurried through the room, which was filled with the stench of dead bodies, and turned a corner that opened into a spacious enclosure. The thin, taut rope at the entrance, about 6 inches above the ground, nearly slipped his mind. He looked up and saw a set of crude, mismatched blades, affixed to the ceiling and hidden by dark rock, just above the tripping hazard. He was certain that impalement would come quickly if he took a careless step. Izuku turned his focus from the trap and looked into the cavern. 3 of the 5 husks he saw were at level 2. But this time, they weren't alone. A small dog-sized, fleshy, spider-like creature scuttled along the walls and across the floor, its every step accompanied by a horrible sound that Izuku could only describe as moist. This creature had a face full of features, unlike the husks. A translucent, greenish-yellow substance dribbled from 2 mouths adorned with odious-looking pincers that protruded from the sides of its head, sizzling wherever it fell. Numerous eyes of various sizes were butted against each other in a single eye socket, quivering slightly. They looked like sickly pustules about to burst, with orange irises and an off-white sclera. Beneath its numerous eyes, hundreds of tiny holes with jagged, pulsing spikes that were sharp oscillated rhythmically, coming and going several times per second, indicating pain. Izuku caught a glimpse of the name tag on the monstrosity. Level 3 Infant Rot, HP, 70/70ths. Izuku thought up a straightforward 2-step plan. He would start by eliminating the outlier as quickly as he could. It would fall in the same manner as the others if 3 void scythes were positioned correctly. The second part of his plan would be as simple as the first, barring any unforeseen circumstances. Izuku stepped carefully over the thin rope that blocked his entrance into the chamber and waited, a now familiar fear in his veins. As Izuku waited for the ideal moment to attack, the sound of scraping blended with the unpredictable flitting of the many-legged rot. After nearly a minute, the otherworldly, multi-legged mass of flesh darted within range, which was, to put it mildly, unsettling. There was a slash of darkness, followed instantly by another, and a deep, violent hum. The baby monster stared at Izuku, and he instinctively jerked away. He made a small error, but he quickly recovered, allowing a third surge of darkness to emerge, dividing the atmosphere in a vicious arc. Unfortunately, he lost valuable time because of his small error. The rot's head twisted sideways, and its mouth, now pointing toward Izuku, spit a glob of slimy acid straight at him as the scythe of darkness ripped through the air. With all his strength, he leapt out of the way in an attempt to avoid it, but the caustic substance caught him on the shoe. The sneaker instantly started to melt away, offering little defense against the evil liquid that was battling to get to him. Infant Rot. Level 3 plus 27 XP you have killed. Level 1 right pointing arrow level 2 plus 5 attribute points your level has increased. Thinking fast, Izuku almost tore his shoe off his foot to avoid getting burned by acid. With minimal opposition, he pulled the sneaker off and tossed it into the air. He backed up at full tilt, not feeling any pain, and saw the husks closing in. Izuku glanced at his MP and saw that it was fully filled. He quickly launched 3 void scythes, cutting his mana pool in half, because he didn't want to sit around doing nothing. One of the 3 level 2 husks was now in pieces, and a level 1 husk now had a huge gash across its middle. As he guided the remaining husks to the entrance he had come from, Izuku experienced a slight mental fog. He reached the rope trap, keeping his front to the husks. The wounded husk was not far behind the 3 unhurt husks, which were just moments away from him. When he saw this, he cautiously crossed the rope and waited for them. It took very little time. A bony, taloned foot attempted to cross the opening's threshold, but it was caught off guard by the rope, which broke instantly upon impact. Izuku saw 6 sharp blades whip through the air with a whooshing sound as they flew forward in an arc with tremendous momentum. The thin body of the husk never had a chance. It was pinned in place by 4 rudimentary blades that pierced its delicate form, causing lumpy blood to bubble out of fatal wounds in irregular gouts. They also left their mark on the 2 pieces of pitted and rough iron that remained. As cold metal found a new home in its sunken face, a husk went limp. Its sole characteristic, a wide mouth, now acted as a barrier to keep the lake of blood from gradually filling it up. Izuku raised his hands, anxiously waiting for the last 2 husks to arrive, once he was reasonably certain that the trap would not snap back into place. One husk tried to squeeze through a narrow opening to get to him, but he kept his eyes fixed on the entrance. Izuku moved forward, aiming for the area directly beneath its arm of the solar plexus with an empowered punch. He broke bone and tore apart muscle tissue as his knuckles struck the bony meat of its abdomen. Time and time again he struck. Izuku's fist almost pierced the back of the husk on the 4th blow, and his hand was covered in chunky, foul-smelling fluid and mushy organs. He gagged. Izuku drew back his fist and tried to wipe the gunk off, using his pants as a makeshift towel. Before he was done, he felt regret. This smell was much stronger than the time he discovered a dead raccoon rotting beneath a log in the woods. He regurgitated. The last weakened husk started to struggle through the mess of dead bodies a few seconds after Izuku threw up his breakfast on the floor. Izuku paused to catch his breath and wiped his mouth with his cleaner hand. He felt awful. Izuku dropped the last surviving husk and let a void scythe fly so as not to get himself any dirtier. He stepped forward shakily and cleared the bodies for the next few minutes to gain passage. Returning to the spacious enclosure, he walked to the far end, the farthest from the corpse pile, and sat down to assess his progress. Bell interrupted with a brief explanation of leveling, possibly sensing that he was no longer in danger. You receive at least 4 benefits with each level you reach: 5 attribute points, a 25% HP replenishment, STA, and complete MP restoration. As mentioned earlier, you will receive a skill point at every 5th level and 10 attribute points rather than 5 at every 10th level. That explained why his MP returned to full so quickly. In addition to Blackout being completely unaffected, it was regrettable that his HP would not be receiving the same treatment. Nevertheless, he could see leveling at the appropriate time turning into a practical strategy in the future. Izuku remembered the purposes of each and pulled up the Attributes tab. In addition to a more powerful, muscular physique, strength, plus 2% to stamina-based attack damage and an overall increase in strength per level. This includes feats like heavy lifting, long jumping, and close quarters combat. Constitution. Plus 1 to blackout threshold, plus 1 health regen per hour, plus 1 OHP, and increased resistance to deadly wounds and toxins per level. Endurance. A leaner physique, plus 1 OSTA, plus 1 to blackout threshold, and an overall increase in endurance per level. This includes endurance feats like marathon running, carrying a heavy load, and enduring high levels of pain. Dexterity. Plus 1% attack range, plus 3 stamina regen per minute, and an overall increase in physical dexterity per level, including abilities like balance, quick reflexes, agile movement, and excellent hand-eye coordination. Intelligence. Plus 1 OMP, with a general improvement in memory and cognitive speed per level. Willpower. Plus 1 blackout threshold, plus 2% mana-based attack damage, plus 3 mana regen per minute, and a general boost in willpower per level. This includes abilities like overcoming temptation, enduring mental manipulation, and completing challenging tasks. Charisma. Enhances your ability to charm, inspire, and influence others on a deeper level and makes you more attractive to look at and be around. Luck. A general increase in good fortune per level and a plus 0.25% chance of critical strike. Without hesitation, he locked in his choice. Features. Power. 7+. Statement. 8+5. Endurance. 9+. Dexterity. 10+. Cognition. 12+. Willpower. 13+. Charisma. 9+. Fortuity. 10+. Attribute points not allocated. 0. Izuku instantly felt a little better and less exhausted. His blood was pumping more forcefully than before, and he simply felt more. To him, the Constitution had been the only option. He had only managed to avoid death once so far, and that had been against a single creature, the weakest and first one at that. He would have to get stronger if he wanted to survive. However, for him, it began with the ability to live. Having experienced what an instance was like firsthand, he had a better understanding of what he would have to become in order to defeat them all at once, a killing machine. But that wasn't his intention. Instances were merely a tool to help him along one aspect of his development. He already felt as though he had given up his humanity by killing people just to gain strength. In a sense, he had no choice. This was the path life had provided for him to reach his objective. Nevertheless, he was choosing the simple route. Even as a quirkless nobody, he had been ready to become a hero, and he would have taken that chance no matter what, even though he had known it was extremely unlikely. Izuku could sense that he was growing numb to taking lives. Though it was becoming less intense, he was still afraid of running into whatever was waiting for him next and having to kill it or perish. It was slow, but he was smart enough to realize that the more lives he took, the less he would notice the enormity of what he was doing. Despite all of that, he was unable to say with certainty that he would never do it again. These were not human beings, heroes, villains, citizens, or anything of the sort. They just were. He could honestly say that right now. He wasn't itching to know the truth, but he wasn't sure if the whole instance thing went deeper than being a barrier made especially for him to overcome. However, Izuku assessed his progress towards skill leveling before continuing. Side Void. Level. 1/10. 96% to the next level. One more, Izuku uttered, exhausted. Strike with empowerment. Level. 1/10. 64% to the next level. Empowered strike, of course, wasn't as far along because he felt more connected to his work when he got up close and personal. In any case, it was probably only a room away from leveling. He retrieved his character sheet and noted his advancement to level 3. Character sheet, 51 150ths expressed to the next level. After finishing that, Izuku strode forward without hesitation so as not to draw attention to his fear. He found his next obstacle in less than a minute. This time, the room he entered was considerably smaller than he had anticipated. It was roughly half as large as the one before it. It was at least twice as lethal, though. A fifth, slightly larger infant rot, with a presence that spoke of its relative unrivaled power, skittered along the narrow enclosure, while 4 level 3 rots did the same. Its form was more advanced than just bigger, though. Level 5 Adolescent Rot, HP 160/160ths. This gave Izuku the uneasy feeling that it was unfair. The tutorial instance was becoming more lethal than it should have been. He found it difficult to come up with a way to end this without dying or becoming permanently disfigured. He wished he had access to more abilities. Disappointed, Izuku remained motionless and pondered. After a while, a terrible thought suddenly occurred to him. A few minutes later, 2 corpses were lying about 5 meters from the room's entrance in a rotted state. Izuku took a few deep breaths before moving. Izuku tossed a piece of husk into the dark room and hid in a corner, hopefully out of sight, waiting for a response. 2 of the level 3 rots scuttled across the floor and stopped in front of the corpses almost simultaneously. Acid oozed from their mouths as they prodded, chittered, and poked. After a short while, one rot lost interest and went back to its spot inside the dark cavity. Without its head being abruptly removed, the rest of the fleshy monstrosity would have followed. He had pondered how he would know if he were to receive a critical hit. Izuku realized now as he lowered his hand like an executioner's axe. He felt a strong, overwhelming urge that required strength. Absolute perfection was imposed by a will that was both his own and not. It seemed to take life with no effort at all, and a single scythe blade hummed through the air. With a mushy thud, the rot fell into a heap and joined the now increasing pile of corpses. It was lying in 2 pieces, leaking caustic liquid, and no other rots came to check their brethren. A prompt was given to Izuku. Level 1 to Level 2 is the new level for Void Scythe. Please choose an upgrade path. Stability, +1 MP cost per level and +3 damage. Power, +2 MP per level and +5 to damage. His strategy worked, it really shouldn't have, and he wiped anxious perspiration from his brow. He had been ready to run back the way he had come as soon as he had finished the rot if his attack hadn't destroyed it in a single swipe. However, he had struck it lucky for the first time since entering this instance. Izuku pondered the right decision after waiting an additional minute to ensure that none of the living rots would ambush him without warning. For him, the choice wasn't hard. He was more likely to kill his target if he dealt more damage. He simply had no intention of doing that outside of instances. Even though he didn't think Void Scythe would be used much outside of them, he couldn't shake the feeling that more was better. In addition, he didn't currently have any MP to spare. So, it was stability. Scythe Void, level 0.2, 2% to the next level. Description: conjure a scythe blade that slices its target, 1 meter long, made of the blackness of the void. Use your hand to trace an arc in the air that you want the blade to mirror in order to use this skill. Damage: 28 1.26 equals 35.28. 33 feet 30 feet 1.10 is the range. Price: 21 megapixels. Cooldown: none. Izuku tossed another piece of husk into the shadows after waiting for his MP to fully regenerate. This time there was only one rot, clearly disturbed. Its head whipped around, looking for the reason behind its death when it saw the corpse of its brethren. The target was never reached. Izuku summoned a succession of lethal black blades, which promptly sliced through the decay. He wasn't as fortunate this time. The rot had managed to make one insectoid cry of alarm before it died. A moment later, the 3 surviving abominations were scuttling quickly across the walls and floor in an attempt to find the cause of death. Izuku remained motionless, mentally performing a few quick calculations. He would level up if he could use 2 scythes each to kill the 2 weaker rots. If the god of the universe was on his side, he should be able to remove the teenager before it destroys him. But he had to move quickly. Already, he could practically feel eyes on him. Just inches from his head, a glob of acid fell, splashing against the wall and landing a few drops on his collarbone. Izuku felt a searing hot pain that made him scream without realizing it. Right away, his will to live gave him laser-like focus, and everything around him slowed to a crawl. He noticed a level 3 scuttling toward him from his left. The rot split in 2 and fell to the ground as darkness flashed twice. He found his other target by whacking his head around. Izuku dove for his life as a thicker, bigger glob of toxic death was hurled in his direction. Stars danced in his vision as his head crashed into an elevated piece of stone. He was on his feet and running frantically toward whatever lay ahead before he could orient himself. Something on his right caught his attention. Schlick. When 3 of its legs were cut in half, the last level 3 rot chittered in rage and fell off the wall. After a second, its numerous eyes burst open, causing repulsive ocular fluid to spill onto the floor. Infant Rot. Level 3 plus 27 XP, you have killed. Level 2 right pointing arrow level 3 plus 5 attribute points, your level has increased. Izuku faced his final challenge, feeling his almost depleted reserves fill up again. The juvenile rot gave him a hungry look while its pincers made wet clacking noises and acid dripped from its mouths like drool. The rot and Izuku both moved simultaneously. Izuku barely ducked to the side in time to avoid the corrosive projectile as a glob of acid flew past his face. As the rot pressed in, searching for his flesh, 2 blades of darkness flashed, but only one found its mark. As there were only a few meters separating them, Izuku leapt back and quickly launched 2 more scythes, both of which struck their target this time. The rot lunged at Izuku, its pulsing spikes beating faster and faster as its health dropped below half. The air was ripped apart by a last scythe, which sliced through the rot's body and sent a stream of foul liquid out of its side. Izuku saw his blackout bar rise by 2 as his mana dropped into the 20s. Izuku prepared his leg for an empowered kick because he had no more mana to spare and the teenage rot was only a few feet away. It was a haunting display of flesh-meeting shine. The rot flew backwards as the empowered strike landed cleanly. Unfortunately, Izuku's calf muscle was now being penetrated by a big glob of acid that was leaking through his torn pants. He struggled to tear off his pant leg and use it to wipe away as much acid as he could, falling to the ground and writhing in pain. Izuku swiped at the acid roughly, his hands shaking from the pain, causing a hole to be bored in his leg. He became aware that the rot was still alive at that point. A burden weighed down on his middle. He saw one of its legs. Its face moved significantly, he saw. The pulsations of the hundreds of tiny spikes were becoming more rapid. Its head was approaching his abdomen. It was about to tear his body to pieces and split it in 2. He was aware that he would never be able to use Empowered Strike. It hurt too much. There was a revving sound that grew louder and louder by the second. Izuku felt the first few spikes rip into him as the rot's head lowered even more. Schlop. You have killed level 5 adolescent rot plus 73 XP. Izuku kept writhing in pain as his flesh continued to melt due to the acid. His vision doubled, and he nearly fainted, clutching at his leg. His head was hurting a lot because his MP had fallen to the single digits. As the acid passed through his leg and out the bottom, he saw it happen. His calf was in ruins, and a piece of his tibia was missing. Izuku dragged himself backward and away from the now deceased monster as best he could. Izuku collapsed to the ground, feeling as though he was about to pass away. The agony was excruciating. Izuku took deep, labored, dry breaths and looked at his heads-up screen. HP. 36 130ths. Santa. 84 90ths. MP. 11 120ths. Blackout. 19 33rds. He struck the floor with his fist. It lay motionless once, twice, and then again. Izuku's lip trembled as he fought back tears. He had tried his hardest. He was not at fault for this. Nothing more could have been done by him. Izuku lay there for an hour before attempting to open his Attributes tab. Features. Power. 7+. Constitution. +1 Endurance. 9+. Dexterity. 10+. Cognition. 12+. Willpower. 13+. Charisma. 9+. Fortuity. 10+. There are 5 unallocated attribute points. He was so incredibly annoyed by his own frailty. But other than fighting to get stronger, there was nothing he could do about it. Now, he had to wait valuable hours to recover despite his best efforts. Who knows, perhaps the test was already over. In contrast to the outside world, he had no way of knowing how quickly time was passing in the instance. Shut up. That was exactly what he needed. Even though he was more accustomed to wallowing in his grief than ever before, it did little to assist him in leaving. He needed a method to avoid getting hurt, but he couldn't do that directly. He questioned the luck stat's short-term efficacy, but it would undoubtedly be helpful. Not knowing what else to do, Izuku increased his strength by 2 and endurance by 1, dropping 2 more constitutional points in the hopes that it would help him in a similar situation to the one he had encountered with the adolescent rot. Unquestionably powerful, Void Scythe needed to use all of his weapons in his fighting style to avoid running out of MP once more and dying rather than just surviving. Since each of his stats was strong in its own right and would enable him to become the hero he desired, Izuku ultimately aimed to have a fairly even balance between them all. Fortunately, Izuku recovered more quickly the more he strengthened his constitution. It still took him several hours to return to full, though. When his recuperation was complete, he was eager to leave and return home. His muscles had become slightly more defined, but he didn't even notice. He saw a glow out of the corner of his eye as he passed the numerous bodies strewn across the floor. Izuku, intrigued, approached the adolescent Rot's corpse slowly. When he stooped to study the glow, he noticed something unexpected. A simple, immaculate silver diadem sat undisturbed, glowing a faint shade of green. He took it up. Uncommon silver diadem. Impact. 4% decrease in damage. No prerequisites. 0.237 kilograms in weight. Sturdiness. 125 125ths. Izuku blinked, startled, and smiled a little at the unexpected good fortune. He was about to try putting the item in his inventory while holding it in his hand when Bell said something. Items are either bought in the shop or found on the bodies of entities killed in instances. They exist in a wide variety of rarities and forms. The quantity and intensity of an item's effects, as well as the degree of its durability, are determined by its rarities. These rarities are as follows: common, uncommon, rare, epic, legendary, mythical, and transcendent. They start with the most common and end with the truly extraordinary. Izuku gave a nod, putting the details away for later. Izuku considered placing the diadem in his inventory while he held it in his hand. A faint flash of blue light occurred as the object vanished from his grasp. Izuku navigated to the Inventory tab after opening his user interface. Stock. United Nations Silver Diadem _______________________ The following The following The following The following Izuku held out an open palm, almost at ease that something other than death was taking up his thoughts. The object returned to him in the same display of color as before. He picked up the diadem and assumed he would put it on. As he attempted to attach it to his forehead, he discovered that it was a bit small, but the item grew to precisely fit his size as soon as the idea occurred to him. He laughed incredulously as he marveled at the display of magic. He didn't feel any different after wearing it, but he figured there wasn't much of a reason. It's not as if his skin would instantly become as hard as his new level of defense. That would be strange, so Izuku was relieved it didn't happen. Izuku's moment of happiness was gradually ebbing away, and he looked resignedly forward. I hope it'll all be over soon. His thirst was taking center stage, making it more difficult for him to swallow. He had to leave this place quickly. Izuku hurried forward, his face a mask of emotion, and entered a symmetrical hallway that ended at a set of simple double doors. Izuku felt a surge of relief on the one hand. On the other hand, he experienced a feeling of icy resignation. It was this. Izuku then strode up to the double doors and carefully peeled one open after pausing to consider his mother, his house, his future, and his objective. A high-pitched creak reverberated throughout the cavern. Izuku peered into the well-lit room, which was adorned with nothing but a blast-white marble floor, and saw a lone figure standing tall at the end of the room. The hands of a huge, 10-foot-tall figure dressed in medieval plate armor rested on a basic greatsword that appeared sturdy and well-made. The figure leveled its sword at his chest after bowing to him as he entered the room. The nameplate was read by Izuku. The Watcher Who Was Forgotten. 400 HP. Izuku looked around and saw no place to hide, and he recoiled when the doors behind him closed on their own. He had two choices. He would either murder this forgotten watcher or perish and be forgotten. Before it started to move toward Izuku, the knight waited politely for him to raise his hands. Even though he was now in a life or death situation, Izuku felt a little horrible because he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was inside. Although it was a terrible circumstance, his only option was to live. Izuku wasted little time in bringing his hand down in a diagonal arc, then immediately reversed the motion. With apparent weight, two blades of darkness materialized and slashed at the knight's armor. As if in line, the Watcher lunged at him with the intention of running him through the cracked, well-made steel. Izuku ducked awkwardly under the blow, then got up and started running. He realized that was useless when he turned around. The knight's blade edge clipped him as he leapt forward, causing him to take 14 damage and hiss in agony. Izuku quickly spun his head around, narrowly avoiding a slash that would have severed his head. Running away didn't work, so his only chance was to somehow escape enough blows to win. Izuku released 2 more scythes into the air, and the Watcher's chest fragment started to fall apart as he raised his hand in a motion that was by now becoming muscle memory. His mana was reduced to a third once more. Izuku waited for a chance to attack, resigned to suffering. As a vertical slash crashed into the ground, he sidestepped, pumped his fist, and twice struck the knight in the hip before it could recover. Izuku, anticipating the next move, slid around to the Watcher's backside and, after twisting at the waist, hit the knight in the lower back with an empowered elbow. The knight reacted quickly as the armor there cracked. It lifted a leg and kicked out at Izuku, giving him a forceful chest thud. He took 19 points of damage and nearly flew back, landing hard on his shoulder. He barely escaped the knight's next blow as he wheezed and reeled from the blow. The marble beneath it crumbled under the impact of its enormous greatsword. Izuku jumped up and used an empowered kick to thwack the knight in the leg, knowing he had another chance to land a blow. As he bobbed out of range, he silently added more damage. Level 1 right pointing arrow. Level 2 is the new level for empowered strike. Please choose an upgrade path. Utility: +1 ST a cost per level and +2 to damage. Per level, +2 ST a cost and +3 damage. Izuku avoided a deadly stabbing attack while ignoring the prompt. The Watcher's HP had dropped to just under half. He sensed that victory was possible, and hope started to well up in his veins. He glanced at his MP and noticed that it was almost back at 2/3 full. He was taken aback by a sudden diagonal slash that went from his abdomen to his upper thigh. Izuku tried to put some distance between himself and the knight, grunting loudly at the new wound that came with a stinging pain and a 36 HP cost. Izuku saw the Watcher's armor really coming apart and hurled 2 consecutive void scythes at it from a few meters away. Izuku could see inside the armor as a piece of plate thudded against the floor. There was nothing. There was not a speck of substance in sight. Izuku intervened as a horizontal slash passed over his head. He quickly fired 3 empowered strikes, tearing off pieces of armor like paper match, taking a huge risk. Izuku knew what was coming and jumped between the knight's legs, but the strong sword swing still clipped his remaining shoe. Izuku could only be relieved that it wasn't his foot when the sole tore partially off the bottom. Izuku looked wearily at the boss's health bar. The Watcher who was forgotten. 54/400 HP. Izuku thought about spending almost all of his remaining mana on 2 last void scythes, knowing he could put an end to this. Instead, he dipped below 30% and used just 1, not wanting to take a chance. Much of the remaining armor was ripped off by a dark blade, demonstrating even more that nothing was underneath. He ran inside the Watcher's range, waiting for the final opportunity he would require, realizing that his victory was just a moment away, a swing that is overhead. It was this. Izuku charged ahead, slamming his fist into the knight's center with a powerful overhead blow. One last blow. Izuku drew his fist back again. He took the remaining HP from the Watcher's now empty health bar and drove it home without hesitation. There was only one issue. Izuku felt a chunk of cold steel sticking out from his solar plexus as he brought his hands there. That struck him as a bit odd. He pondered whether his HP had yet to drop to 0. The Forgotten Watcher has been killed by you. +290 XP. Level 3 right pointing arrow. Level 4, +5 attribute points. Your level has increased. A quest called The Beginning +600 XP and +5 Vira has been finished by you. Level 4 right pointing arrow. Level 5 +5 attribute points and +1 skill point. Your level has increased. Izuku looked down and saw the sword and the rest of the Forgotten Watcher vanish. It was replaced by a big gray key. Unconsciously, he reached for it, barely thinking he was still alive. However, he did feel extremely drowsy. It was all right. Once he was out of there, he would go to sleep. Key for random instance. Level 5. The weight is 0.1 kilogram. Durability: indestructible. Izuku put it in his inventory and started to move in the direction of a recently opened portal. An instance key has been located. One is always dropped by the boss at the end of an instance, and it can be traded for a lower tier instance key or used to start an instance quest. Keep in mind that there are numerous varieties of instance keys that can provide you with important details about an instance before you enter it. However, these keys are significantly more costly when bought from the store. He was indifferent. He was far too exhausted to do that. And thirsty. To finish the tutorial, enter the portal. He lumbered over to the portal and walked right in, ignoring the message. Izuku ended up back at the river on the other side. He was thirsty, really. Izuku took a large drink and felt weary. He had to return home. Izuku took 3 steps forward and collapsed, unconscious, on his face. Kyoka walked down the sidewalk, breathing easily. A rock song was playing in her ears, provided by the new band, Glass Hinges. At the moment, she was taking a walk to help her relax before the impending test. Kyoka was alone at home and could only take so many practice exams before her mind blew up from boredom because her mother was on tour with her own band until a few days after the test. She could practice music or work out, of course, but she worked much more effectively when she had her head clear. So the walk. In addition, she thought late February was lovely, even though it was pretty cold outside. As Kyoka stepped onto a clean wooden bridge that spanned a lazy river, she felt satisfied. She was no stranger to this place. She had discovered her favorite spot in the entire prefecture, aside from her room, further down the path after slicing through some tall grass and somewhat dangerous stones that were perched just inches above the slowly flowing water. She turned off her music as she heard the soft rush of water from the riverbed. In fact, it was pleasantly familiar to her overdeveloped ears and music in and of itself. Any lingering anxiety she may have had up until this point in the walk was eased by the faint mist against the cloudy sky. She knew she was right where she wanted to be because of a tree with a slight lean to it that was embraced on either side by 2 mismatched boulders covered in healthy moss. As the sounds of nature played a soft melody just for her, a ghost of a smile blossomed on her face. Then she noticed what must have been a corpse. As an oppressive cold gripped Kyoka's body, she instinctively stepped back. Unconsciously, she reached for her phone, but her hands were shaking too much to hold it firmly. Holy fucking, oh my god. She inhaled deeply a few times and tried to think clearly. She realized after a moment that she was simply too frazzled to do so. I just need to, I think I should fuck. In a display of extreme anxiety, Kyoka grabbed her head and began tugging at her hair. Her head started to spin from the slow-moving water she had always enjoyed. The tree leaves screamed as a tiny gust of wind blew through the enclosure. Okay. Damn it, okay. With no other option, she halted abruptly in front of the body and lowered herself into a crouch to check if she could do anything. Something. With hesitation, she extended her hands to touch its face, but she quickly withdrew them. She paused to consider what she had read and seen. How did you respond to such a circumstance? Her mind instantly conjured up a picture. Kyoka extended her hand once more and pressed her middle and pointer fingers against the jugular vein in the neck. Her breath caught. It wasn't a dead body. She did what she believed to be right, unsure of how to interpret that realization. Hey, she said, shaking the shoulder of the body. She trembled more. Hey, can you hear me? Are you okay? She asked. As the body's own shattered open in terror, her life flashed before her eyes. As the person on the ground clumsily floundered to their feet, Kyoka staggered backwards. They quickly assumed an unpolished combat stance and focused their vision on her. Whoa, she said, her voice trembling a little. She held up her hands in a gesture of tranquility. It's all right. Just calm down, okay. After a moment of staring at her, the individual appeared to reach a conclusion. After a brief pause, they lowered their arms and mimicked her motion. I'm sorry. The individual, a boy of her age, she assumed, spoke in a small voice with a tone of politeness, fear, and sincere regret. Kyoka remained where she was, attempting to appear as unthreatening as possible, saying, it's okay. Are you hurt? She asked after a brief pause. The boy shook his head slowly after appearing to consider her question for a moment. I'm fine, I think. He glanced around him. Do you mind if I sit down? Kyoka exhaled a sigh of relief. To his left, she indicated a sizable piece of stone with a comparatively flat surface. No, that's totally fine. Do you mind if I take a seat on that rock next to you? She asked. It was close enough that he probably wouldn't believe she was afraid of him, but far enough that she could flee if necessary. He crossed his legs and lowered himself awkwardly into a seated position, saying, yeah, thank you. Kyoka approached the rock cautiously and sat with her legs dangling over the edge. In the background, there was a subtle but noticeable tension in the air. But it was a million times better than what she had been experiencing seconds before. There was a pause during which she would collect her thoughts. What ought she to say? It looked like something from a movie, with him lying flat on his face, covered in blood, and other things she couldn't identify. Looking at him more closely now, she saw that his pants, shirt, and last shoe were all in ruins, and he was wearing a tiara. After what might have been a minute or 10, Kyoka finally broke the silence. How did you end up like that? Was a direct beginning, but it was undoubtedly justified. He appeared to think about what he was saying as he lowered his head. It was my quirk, he remarked, glancing at her but avoiding eye contact. She considered that for a while and was a little concerned about the answers that might be revealed by more inquiries. She pointed to his clothing condition and obvious stains and asked, "How did your quirk do that?" Once more, Kyoka felt that something was wrong, beyond the obvious, because he didn't respond right away. The response appeared sincere, but it was clear that he was concealing something, or more likely, a lot of things. "I kinda just got it actually, my quirk I mean. It's really unique and I don't really know how to explain it to you. Sorry." She paused to give him a direct look, which should have communicated her seriousness. "I don't mean to pry, but I really need to know more than that." Kyoka's jacks were coiling and uncoiling in a display of obvious anxiety, and she was unaware of it. "I just found someone who I thought was dead, covered in blood, and wearing clothes that look like they were chucked in a shredder, you know. It's not something that just happens, and I won't lie, I'm a little freaked out right now." He was slow to respond once more, which unnerved her. She waited for him to finish speaking as the thought of him not being mortally wounded with so much blood on him began to replay in her head. "I'm not really sure what my quirk is. I can do a lot with it. I don't know its limitations yet. Like I said, I just got it, 2 days ago, I think." "What day is it?" She saw his hands tremble, fingers repeatedly grabbing and releasing. "It's Saturday, just after 12. He flinched as though he had been hit. Kyoka sensed that something was wrong. He was unharmed. "Oh no, no," he exclaimed, leaping to his feet and pacing and mumbling like a crazy person. Without wasting any time, Kyoka moved away from him and left her own place on the rock. She had to go. Something wasn't right. "I haven't texted Mom at all since yesterday morning." Her adrenaline rush abruptly stopped in that moment, leaving her nervous system confused. She watched as he took a very depressing and broken phone out of his pocket. He put his phone back in his pocket and turned to face her, saying, Crap. She's probably so worried." She was now even more perplexed. "When you said it was Saturday, you meant the Saturday before the UA exam, right?" She moved slightly closer, her curiosity now overriding her sense of caution. Yeah, wait, are you taking the exam too?" she said. He grinned, a little bitter, and said, "I plan to. I mean, I've wanted to be a hero since I was 4 years old." His smile softened as he turned to face her. "I haven't always tried as hard as I should have, but I don't want to do anything else." She said, "It's my dream, why you know." Suddenly, his face became bright as a beacon. She gave a small nod. "You said, too, right? As in you're also taking the exam?" She asked. "Oh my gosh, that's so awesome. What's your quirk? Does it have to do with your ears? They're really cool by the way. Wait, can you hear my heart from here? Or is it some sort of sound projection like present mic? Or maybe." She raised her voice in the hopes that he would hear her over his own seeming excitement, saying, Whoa. Hold on there, dude." She gave him a look that she hoped made him realize how odd their current circumstance was. "I don't even know what your quirk is yet, and besides, how do I know you're not a villain pretending to be a hero wannabe?" she said. He looked puzzled now, mirroring her own expression from a moment ago. She let out a sigh. "Hello, you're covered in blood and still haven't explained that to me. And you're also somehow not hurt. Did you kill someone? Why are your clothes shredded? Why won't you give me straight answers? And what's up with the tiara?" Her final query made her sound even more perplexed. His expression faded and his shoulders slumped. When you put it like that, damn." He abruptly looked directly into her eyes and pierced them deeply. She was on the verge of believing him without proof because he was so honest when he said, "But I swear I'm not a villain." She snorted, "And it's a diadem, and not a tiara." "All right, if you're not a villain, can you prove it? She wasn't sure whether it was good or bad that she was feeling less uncomfortable about him. He muttered so softly that she could only hear the last part of his words as he glanced down at her question. Do this. She leaned in and cocked her head to the side. What did you say? I said, could a villain do this? What he did wasn't even on the extended list of things he could have said or done to support his position. His face transformed into a terrifyingly realistic representation of All Might, resembling something from a cartoon, or, depending on your point of view, a horror movie. A villain, you say? What in the foo? How could I possibly be a villain when I am here? He stood for a long time without tensing up. It just so happened that the inflection, the face, and the pose were all flawless. It was completely ridiculous. She started giggling. It was the type of heart-wrenching, soul-healing laughter that goes along with a fundamental memory. The kind of laugh that comes only once every few years and that you miss when it disappears. She had almost controlled it at one point, but then she saw his diadem glint comically and his small mite face falter a little. She was on the ground after suddenly laughing once more. Her stomach ached. She was unsure of the exact moment she recovered, but she doubted she had ever laughed so hard in her life. She saw the now unmited boy with his face in his hands, lobster red, as her last laughs faded. She doubted she would have heard his whispered disbelief if her ears weren't as good as they were. Oh my God, I can't believe I just did that. I'm so lame. Please let me forget this ever happened. A grin of satisfaction crept onto Kyoka's face as she approached the blatant All Might superfan. He was rather adorable. The thought made her cheeks warm. He curled up even more and said, hey, I don't think I've ever laughed that hard, so thanks for that. No, I meant that in a good way. It was genuinely impressive, dude. He sighed. With a hopeful expression on his crimson face, he gazed at her and said, anyway, after that show, I pretty much believe that, at the very least, you're not a villain. She pointed to him in his present condition and said, but, I need to know how this happened. He nodded, having wormed his way out of his ball. As soon as he exhaled, her nose came back to life. I get it. If I were you, I wouldn't leave without knowing what's going on either. Oh God. She plugged her attacked passages with her fingers as they reached her nostrils. What is it? He asked, looking up at her with a worried expression. Stiffened, he said, no offense, dude, but you smell like really bad. Then leapt to his feet and ran to the edge of the river. He dove into the water and said, I'm so sorry. I forgot I was in the instant. She trailed off, then sighed, no, wait. You don't have to. Instead, on second thought, that was probably a good idea. Kyoka was still genuinely unsure of what to think. The situation itself was obviously strange, but she had a gut instinct that told her there was much more to it than she could imagine even if she tried. The boy was definitely distinct. He was mysterious, even beyond the obvious. Something about him held her hand even though she knew she should probably wash her hands of the situation, call the police, and try to forget what had happened. Kyoka returned to the rock and sat down as the boy washed up. He shivered as he climbed out of the river, and she felt a twinge of sympathy for him. She was certain he felt every gust of wind piercing his skin, and his current shirt was about as covered as a crop top. With a sigh, she got back to her feet. Kyoka took off her jacket and extended it for him to take, saying, here. His face flushed scarlet as he stumbled, what? And no, I mean you don't have to. She gently shoved it into his arms and rolled her eyes, saying, just take it, you dork. She tilted her head toward his diadem and said, did you wear the thing in the water, too? He muttered, yeah. It kinda stays on like that, as he put the jacket on clumsily. She gestured him to their old seats and asked, Quirk related. He followed her over and nodded, saying, you could say that. Give you superpowers or something. And not really. They sat down, and Kyoka started tapping the rock with her fingers. She only needed to wait for him to speak because they both knew what she wanted to know. She kept her eyes focused on him because she was curious about his quirk and the mystery he had inadvertently created around it. She was undoubtedly a little nervous too, because, well, he was just covered in blood and everything. He was fidgeting with a twig he had picked up and had so far avoided looking into her eyes. You're sure you want to know, right? He asked. He nodded slowly and said, yes. And don't worry, I won't tell anyone that doesn't need to know. He chewed on his lip and broke a limb off the twig, tossing it aside. Please keep this a secret. I don't know anybody that has a quirk quite like this, and it's something I'm not sure how to feel about yet. She readily agreed, saying, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone, I won't tell, okay. After gathering his thoughts for a moment more, he lifted his head and surveyed the enclosure. All right. His eyes appeared to gaze off into space for a moment before a worried expression and a softly whispered, what? Filled the almost silent forest. It would probably be better if I just showed you. So hold on a second. Kyoka said, you good, dude. With a worried tone. He got up and looked sheepish as he met her eyes and said, yeah, don't worry about it. And apologetic. I just realized I don't even know your name, he said. Jiro Kyoka, you. Perhaps it was a bad idea to reveal her name, but she didn't think he would actually do any harm. He bowed and gave a small smile, saying, Midoriya Izuku. Nice to meet you, Jiro. Of everything she had envisioned, the translucent green rectangle that materialized hovering in the air demonstrated that her imagination was, in fact, inadequate. Anyway, don't be too startled, okay? This is still weird, even to me. Kyoka just stared without a word. Her drumming fingers paused, and her mouth opened slightly. Izuku swiped the screen down, revealing a page with his name, class, stats, and other details. I don't have a name for it yet, but my quirk basically turns me into a D&D character, or something like that. I have stats and everything, look. Kyoka rubbed her eyes, blinked once, and then laughed helplessly. He trailed behind. Kyoka walked closer to him to get a better look. It's a lot to take in, I know. It took me the whole day to fully acknowledge that it was real when I got it, and it still seems fake sometimes. Holy shit, yeah. For a few seconds, Kyoka skimmed the screen, taking in each detail she could see several times. Assuming it functioned as she believed it to, she doubted that, but nothing was off the table. This is insane. How? It doesn't make sense at all. Can you do moves and stuff too? She asked. She was instantly shown to be mistaken when he swiped down once more. She gave a stupid nod and said, I can show you if you want, but I only have 2 right now. When the screen vanished, he turned around and waited for her to come. He approached a boulder that she recognized and said, the first one is called Empowered Strike. But there were several cracks in it that she couldn't remember ever seeing before. Astonished, she watched as Izuku drew back a coiled fist that started to glow golden. It was absolutely silent as that same fist struck the boulder a second later. As rock chips fell away from the old rock and the spiderweb of cracks grew much wider, Kyoka felt wrong. No impact had reached her ears. Was she deaf suddenly? A wave of nausea was rising in Kyoka's stomach. To prevent herself from vomiting, she put a hand to her mouth. With worry on his face, Izuku said, Hey, are you alright, Jiro? It took her a moment to answer. I'm fine. What was that? The punch had caused impressive damage, to put it mildly, but the silence was unsettling enough to make her skin crawl. Empowered Strike is from the Silent Monk class. As far as I understand, every skill I get from it doesn't make any sound. I also can't make any noise while using a skill from it, otherwise it won't work. That part almost got me, never mind. She took note of the way he rambled but decided not to say anything about it. She acknowledged, I'll be honest, I really don't like it. Izuku winced and turned away. I'm sorry. She twirled one of her jacks between her fingers and raised the other to eye level, saying, No, it's fine. It's because of my quirk. She smirked arrogantly at him and said, I have really good hearing, so having that taken away is really unsettling to me. He appeared to want to ask a million questions but refrained for the moment. But don't get it twisted. I could still kick your ass if you tried anything. These babies do more than just hear well. Izuku said, Right, I'll keep that in mind, and began to approach the river. She trailed behind. He nodded, but she caught his eye and said, So, is your other move like that too? Because if it is, give me fair warning this time, please. Izuku held up a hand and traced an arc in the air, saying, My other skill is called Void Scythe. It's from the Void Mage class, so don't worry, it should be fine. A meter-long black curved blade with a purple tint hummed as it skillfully divided the river water in half. It disintegrated into thousands of dark particles as it completed its arc and vanished. Fuck. Kyoka felt incredibly fortunate all of a sudden. Kick his ass. Had he been able to do that all along? Once more, a blade of ferocious, refined darkness sliced the water in half while humming a melancholic melody. Can you do that again? Kyoka gestured to a fallen tree that had long since lost its luster and asked, "What about on that log?" When the scythe reaped the dead wood, a furrow as long as her phone appeared. She swore once more and sat down on the grass. "You could kill me with that if you wanted to, huh?" Izuku would have been unable to do anything more than scream before everything was over if she had been a bad person. He said, glancing at the floor and clenching his fists, his face displaying suppressed rage. He inhaled deeply before settling down beside her, saying, "I would never do something like that. Ever." She hummed in agreement. "You wanted to know why I was covered in blood, right?" Pulling strands of grass from the ground and watching them fall from his hand, he was silent for a while. She soon noticed tears welling up in his eyes. Izuku's voice sounded haunted and trembled as she said, "It didn't even have a face." Kyoka's breath caught and she felt a rush of ice in her veins. He wiped away his unshed tears as he took a moment to gather himself, but his eyes soon returned to their glossy state. "It came at me like it wanted to kill me, so I cut its legs off. It didn't care at all. Just kept coming and started ripping my stomach apart. I still remember the way its neck snapped when it hit the wall." Kyoka experienced unexpected tears of her own. Her breathing became more noticeable, and she bit her quivering lip. That was only the first one, though. Izuku started to cry, but this time he didn't bother wiping his eyes. He looked her in the eyes and said, "There were more of them, and not just them. There were these things with hundreds of eyes. One of them almost melted my leg off. His eyes were broken. I had to kill them all to leave. What kind of hero does that?" Kyoka didn't have to understand exactly what he was talking about. It was impossible to fake the sincerity that radiated from his voice as he told his horrific experience out loud. She put her arms around him and wept alongside him. He sobbed openly, and she felt his arms close to her. "There wasn't anything else I could do. I just want to help people. Please forgive me." It broke Kyoka's heart. Squeezing him more tightly, she whispered, "It's all right, it's all right." Kyoka had never seen herself as an emotional person, at least not on the outside. She had never wept over a lost toy or a scraped knee, and although she had empathy, she could count on one hand the number of times she had done so for someone else. Although she was aware that life was challenging and she had no problem assisting others in resolving their issues, it took something genuinely tragic to move her as deeply as Izuku did. She squeezed him once more. "It's all right." He eventually slipped out of the embrace a few minutes later. The river looked almost placid, as still serene as ever. The soft sound it made as it lightly brushed the rocks would easily lull someone to sleep if they lay down next to it. Izuku grinned as he glanced at his lap and said, "Thank you for listening and not judging me." Kyoka simply nodded and wiped the last of the tears and snot from her face before saying, "And for comforting me. No one's ever done that for me before." Izuku extended a blue-glowed hand as she gathered herself. A gray key that hardly fit in his palm materialized after a moment. Kyoka looked at the odd object, a little bewildered. As he gave it to her, she questioned, "What is it?" "It's surprisingly light." Izuku relaunched the screen and slid to the Quests tab under it. Izuku graciously took the key from Kyoka's hand and held it in the air. "As I understand it, quests are essentially dungeon delves. At least, that's what my first one was." Kyoka crossed her arms and exhaled a chilly breath. "In technical terms, they're called instances, and you need one of these to enter them." Her jacket was mist. "So, it opens a portal or something?" she asked, not ruling out the possibility that such a scenario would now occur. With a look of approval, he said, "You really hit the nail on the head. Basically, I use this to generate a quest," he said, pointing to the key he was holding, "and then a portal appears once I start it." Izuku leaned back on his hands as the key vanished in a burst of blue light. "Once you enter, I don't think you're allowed to leave until everything is dead. If you die instead, you don't come back." Kyoka began to tremble from the cold, saying, "That's awful." Izuku removed her jacket and put it back on her shivering shoulders before getting to her feet. "Yeah, it is." She turned her head around, flushed, and checked her face for warmth before following. Jiro." She got up and brushed the grass from her pants, asking, "What's up?" Kyoka took her phone out of her pocket and gave it to him, saying, "Would it be okay if I used your phone to call my mom? I want to let her know I'm alright." After navigating it for a while, he arrived at the keypad and punched in a number, saying, "Thank you." Kyoka considered leaving to give him some privacy, but changed his mind. Izuku's innocence would be further confirmed if she heard the other side, and she might learn something helpful. The person on the line answered after 2 rings. Midoriya residence, this is Inko. Kyoka could clearly hear the voice on the other end and observed that the elder Midoriya had a cadence that was similar to Izuku's, albeit more assured. Hi mom, it's Izuku. Kyoka's heart warmed as she saw Izuku's lips lift into a smile that expressed his uncomplicated, unwavering love for his mother. Izuku's eyes widened for a moment, and Kyoka could see exactly what he was thinking about. Izuku. Oh dear, I've been so worried about you. Why haven't you said anything until now? I was scared you were hurt or got into trouble, honey. He obviously didn't enjoy lying to his mother, as Kyoka could see by the way he cringed when he said, "No, I'm fine, I swear. I dropped my phone last night and it didn't really work after that. I was too embarrassed to ask to use someone else's, so that's why I'm so late in contacting you. Sorry, Mom." But Kyoka couldn't hold it against him. Kyoka swore she could hear the smirk in Inko's voice as she said, "Well, I'm really glad to hear you're okay, sweetie, but whose phone are you calling from?" Well, that's..." Izuku froze, then slowly turned his head until his eyes met Kyoka's. "Your girlfriend's, perhaps?" he asked. There was utter horror in his face. He started to move his lips, but no sound emerged. "Is that a yes, then? Oh, I'm so proud of you, Izuku. And you even slept over at her house. Please tell me you remembered to use protection. I don't want to be a grandmother just yet, even if I know my grandbabies would be so unbelievably cute." Inko spoke the final phrase with a tone that felt like regret. Izuku's face could easily be mistaken for an overripe tomato. Even though Kyoka was sure her embarrassment was nothing compared to his, she could feel some heat creeping onto her skin. Izuku finally managed to utter a single word after a moment of silence. Mom. Yes, honey." He took a deep, soothing breath and exhaled it all at once. "I mean, we didn't do anything like that. I'll tell you about it when I get home, okay? I'll be back in a few hours." "Alright, do you need a ride home, sweetie?" Kyoka noticed that he managed to smile a little despite his embarrassment. Grabbing his shirt with his free hand, he fidgeted with the frayed material and said, "No, I'll be okay. Thanks for asking, though. I'll see you later. I love you, Izuku." "Love you too, Mom." Izuku's hand slapped his forehead and he glanced apologetic at Kyoka. "Oh, and one more thing. Does your girlfriend mind if I put her number on my contact list?" he asked. With little hesitation, she nodded. Even though the situation was not ideal, Kyoka reasoned that it might be helpful to have a contact that she could use to talk to Izuku. She was not willing to play the role of girlfriend for a guy she had just met, even if he was proving to be a good guy. At worst, she was in for an awkward conversation, but she hoped Izuku would clarify things when he got home. He mouthed an apology to Kyoka, who shrugged and said, "Yeah, that's fine." Izuku hummed a, "Yes. Great. I'll make a nice dinner, so don't get home too late." Kyoka smirked as she strolled up to Izuku's side and said, "Bye, Mom." He hung up and gave Kyoka her phone back, saying, "Bye, honey." "So, girlfriend huh?" Kyoka inquired in a playful manner. Izuku moaned, buried his head in his arms, and fell into a defeated crouch. She chuckled. With a pout on his lips, he lifted his head. He got up and leaned against a tree, saying, "In my defense, she created that fantasy all on her own. All I said is that I was going somewhere and wanted to keep it a secret. I almost died from embarrassment when she spun the whole girlfriend thing out of nowhere." Kyoka let out a longing sigh. She said, "I would have loved to see that," and then she looked at her phone to see the time. "Well, it's been about 2 hours and I've had enough emotional whiplash to last a year, so I'm probably going to head home. You should tag along." Izuku's face turned beet red and his entire body tensed. He stammered, What? You mean I can't but huh?" Kyoka grinned warmly. His entire stuttering behavior was rather endearing. She remarked, "Unless of course you're fine going home looking like that," indicating his attire. Izuku looked away from his ruined shirt, pants that were really shorts, and one half shoe. "I should have some spares that you can borrow." Izuku furrowed his forehead slightly in concern. Good point. Are you sure, though?" he asked. She nodded, understanding his trepidation but no longer believing he was acting maliciously. Kyoka looked him in the eyes and waited for a response. "I mean, do I have any reason to doubt you at this point? Besides, I want to be a hero too, remember? So, If I can help someone need, I'm going to do it. Thank you, he said in an animated voice. That means a lot. As she walked out of the enclosure, she gestured to him, saying, "It's no big deal, dude. Gives me more time to ask about your quirk, too." Izuku came right behind. As they moved along the dirt path, she questioned, "So, what else can you do?" After a moment of silent thought, he answered, "Well, I have an inventory." She laughed in astonishment and raised her eyebrows. "The real deal, like, you can shove a bunch of crap in there and it just exists." He gave a serious nod. He paused and hummed a reflective note, "Yeah, it's really useful. Did it with the key earlier. Though Bell mentioned in the tutorial that I can't put anything that's not from an instance in there currently, so its effectiveness is limited." She also stopped moving. She tilted her head and asked, "Bell." He picked a leaf from a tree and played with it as he resumed his movement. Are they, not really sure, told me that they're my guide. They read out tool tips, level up notifications and stuff. I can ask them questions about things I don't understand too, but sometimes their answers are vague, or they don't answer at all. It's strange." Kyoka absorbed it in silence. "Huh, that is weird. Maybe you have to ask questions a certain way." He gave a headshake. He ripped the leaf in two and grabbed another one, saying, "See, could be, but I've already tried that with a few things. Hasn't worked yet. Anyway, other than that, I have a journal that I can write in, and a shop. Though I'm not a high enough level to access the shop tab yet, so I don't know exactly what it is. Belle said I could use it to buy and sell a bunch of stuff, but I guess we'll see." Grabbing one of her own leaves, Kyoka twirled it between her forefinger and thumb. "Damn, that's seriously nuts." "It is. Can you see why I was so hesitant to talk about it?" "Sorry about that, by the way." Izuku grinned and agreed, tearing his leaf once more and replacing it with a twig that had several offshoots. As they walked along the bridge, they both stopped to admire the placid river. "Yeah, it's pretty unbelievable. And to be honest, I've never heard of a quirk even remotely similar to yours. Like, at all. It kinda seems like multiple quirks in one." As the sun rose above the clouds, it started to warm up a little. After glancing around, Izuku asked, "So, you said you have a journal?" Before reviving the screen, "I still can't believe that's real," Kyoka said forlornly. Izuku found the tab titled, Journal. In the lower right corner, she noticed a page counter that was in the early thousands. He searched, "Hero," and more than 1,000 results showed up in an ordered list. "It's super useful. There's not a limit to how much I can put in here as far as I know, and I can even filter search. I even considered using it to get easy hundreds on tests, but I'm still not sure about using it like that. Seems a bit cheaty," he said, rubbing the back of his head. Kyoka pointed to the screen that was hovering in midair and asked, "But how could you cheat if everyone can see this?" "Not exactly hidden." Izuku acknowledged with a hum. "That's the problem. They can't." He hesitated for a second before the screen vanished from her view, but he managed to catch her eye. "I can still see it perfectly well at the moment." As they continued to move, she made an audible sound of comprehension. "The only reason you could see it at all is because I toggled a visibility function." "So, do you get stat points when you level up or are they like, automatically assigned?" she asked, searching her mind for any more questions as they walked in relative silence. From her position, Kyoka could practically see the sidewalk. He looked down and shook his head in frustration, saying, "I get them when I level." He briefly displayed a distressed expression, saying, "I'm not really sure what to put them in at the moment. I have 10 unallocated, but everything is useful so it's hard to decide. Especially because I want to be a hero, not a murderer." Kyoka placed a hand on his shoulder and squeezed it, saying, "Midoriya, please don't be so hard on yourself. It won't help." She grinned at him before climbing a stairway made of natural rock. "Have you tried working out to increase your stats rather than leveling?" Quote. "No, but that is a good idea," he said, shaking his head. "Bell claimed that I could raise them by finishing pop-up trials, but I haven't seen one yet. I'm more worried about passing the exam than anything else right now," he said, snapping an offshoot off the twig and throwing it into a bush. "Please don't remind me," Kyoka moaned. "Even after studying a ridiculous amount for the written exam, I still feel like I'm lagging behind." "I was more talking about the practical," he said, laughing. "I don't want to boast, but I'm fairly certain that I'll do well on the written section." She grinned and said, I almost forgot you're an uber hero nerd." Huh. What are you discussing? Like a deer caught in headlights, he froze. She grinned more broadly and said, 2 words, All Might. He was so adorable that Kyoka gave him a long laugh when his face turned red. Izuku crossed his arms and gave her a playful look after he recovered. It's a real shame that I have all these endnotes on the exam at home and no one to share them with. He sighed in a mockingly dejected tone, adding, I guess I'll just throw them away. Kyoka's eyes widened, and she hurried to regain his favor. Wait. I apologize. I didn't mean it, I guess. He smiled. When they finally arrived at the sidewalk, Izuku said, apology accepted. He paused, then turned to face her, asking, are you okay with me delaying further questions for the time being? If at all possible, I don't want anyone to listen in. She grinned and said, yep, that's fine. Kyoka turned to face her home and began to move. Broccoli boy, how far do you live from here? She cocked her head toward the direction they were walking. I'm about 10 minutes this way. Broccoli boy, quote, the hair is the problem. I think it's pretty accurate, she jokingly said. He opened and closed his mouth several times, obviously trying to think of something to say. I've been called worse. She gave him a wink and said, consider it a term of endearment. At last, he managed to reply, Turnip girl. Huh, she asked, raising an eyebrow. Quote. Well, he repeated, it's the hair. He cringed and said, and your ear thingies, in closing. Her expression was unimpressed. A turnip. He looked horrified as he stammered, I mean an really pretty turnip, though. She flushed. He tried to hide from his issue by hiding behind his arms. Wait no, forget I said anything. He said. His mistake made Kyoka feel warm inside. She poked Izuku in the side with her jack to hasten his recovery because she didn't want to stand in the middle of the sidewalk for an indefinite period of time. Dork, she said with a laugh. She prodded him once more, asking, you gonna hide in there all day or answer my question? He looked her in the eyes and turned away instantly, blushing, saying, sorry. She gave him one last prod, this time on the forehead, and went on, saying, I live at the Musudafu General Apartments, so not too far from here either. What's apartment life like? Kyoka thought it wouldn't hurt to strike up a conversation. It would be a welcome change after all the serious topics they had discussed. He gave her a questioning look and said, it's nice. Plenty of space and we don't really have any bad neighbors, so it's quiet most of the time. Nothing much to complain about. How's living in a house? Kyoka gave a shrug. She said with a hint of fondness, dunno. Fine, I guess. Haven't lived anywhere else, so it's hard to compare. To me, it's just home. You can tell me what you think when we get there. Fair warning though, it's a little messy right now. Izuku dismissed the remark with a wave of his hand. Not a problem. I could help you clean up if you want. It's the least I could do since you're lending me some clothes, Izuku replied with a smile. As they turned a corner, she looked around to make sure they were headed in the correct direction and said, I might take you up on that if you wouldn't mind. It's really not bad, but I should be doing a better job keeping it tidy. As they settled into a cozy silence, he followed her and said, I would be happy to. With only a few words spoken back and forth between them, the remainder of the walk home was uneventful. When they finally reached her street, they were immediately in front of a small, 2-story single-family house. It featured a small path to the front door, with a bed of small rocks on either side, and a good-sized driveway with an attached garage. She watched as Izuku traced the exterior with his eyes, clearly impressed, and said, wow, it looks really nice, Jiro. She walked up to the front door after twirling a jack around her finger. She deadpanned, thanks, I built it myself, as she inserted her key into the deadbolt. Wonder glistened in his eyes. Really? That's amazing. Did you also? She turned to see his face and laughed. Dude, I was joking. He resembled a puppy who had been kicked. I can't believe I bought that, he grumbled. She even told me she's lived here for her whole life. Why am I like this? Kyoka's lips twitched upward. That's what they'd been doing a lot lately. Man, you're really gullible, huh? She said as she opened the door and entered. Finally, home. Izuku paused at the doorway and muttered, and no. It's just, I trust you. She responded, you've known me for all of 2.5 hours. He eventually walked through the door of her home, removing his damaged shoe while humming a melancholy tune. Her smile widened. He must have really liked them, Kyoka reasoned. Why yeah, but still. Izuku took off his equally ruined socks and followed her deeper inside the house. The sight of the posters, records, and music-flavored trinkets lining the walls made Kyoka a little uneasy as she watched him turn in all directions. Then he froze. "Your mom isn't home, is she?" He inhaled deeply, slapped his cheeks, and muttered something about a luck stat before continuing, "Nope, she's out." She walked up a flight of stairs and turned to face him to make sure he was following her. "Well, anyway, you should probably take a shower before anything else. I don't think river water is a suitable substitute for shampoo." He was tomato red once more. Are you sure?" he asked. Even though she was no longer surprised by that, it was still cute. After retrieving a bath towel from the hall closet, she strolled towards the restroom. She held the door open for him and said, "Yep, I'm sure. My nose will thank you." She then walked across the hall to her room. A pair of black sweatpants, a band t-shirt with the Fumigators logo printed on the front and back, and a thin white hoodie with a zipper were among the items Kyoka pulled from her drawers. She walked back and saw Izuku standing there speaking incoherently about shower knobs. "Here," Kyoka declared, placing the clothing on the bathroom's tile floor. Then Izuku's stomach roared, "You hungry at all?" As he covered his face with the shower lining, she laughed. He looked at her, his face showing his embarrassment. "I'm not really a great cook, but I have some instant stuff in the cupboard. So, it's either soup, ramen, or rice and chicken. Are there any chicken noodles in stock?" As he started going through the clothes she had brought him, he asked in a timid tone. "I do have cheddar and broccoli, though." He whimpered and lowered his head in surrender. "Sorry, no such luck." She smiled. He said in dramatic despair, "Sounds fantastic, thank you," and she laughed, pointing to the shower, feeling proud of herself. "The temperature knob is on the right, and the pressure knob is on the left." She turned to face him and said, "Food will be done in 10 or less, but if you're one of those crazy weirdos who take a half-hour shower, you can always reheat it in the microwave. Use the shampoo and conditioner in the corner, not the ones in the basket. Those are Mom's and I enjoy being alive." Incredulous, he muttered, "Who says madcap?" She became red in the face. She retorted defensively, "Yeah, okay, not my best work," and reached for the door handle. "Enjoy your shower, green bean." After preparing Izuku's meal, Kyoka started cleaning up the mess she and her mother had created over the course of a month or so by picking up clothes and trash from the floor. Fortunately, Izuku didn't like to take long showers and ate quickly, so he was assisting with the cleanup after a short while, and less than 30 minutes later, they were essentially finished. "Does your mother play music or something? Or are you all just music lovers?" As he stuffed the last of the dirty laundry into the hamper, Izuku asked. Kyoka tied off a trash bag that was mostly full, feeling a rush of pride. In reality, she plays guitar for dull moment. She also writes some of the songs, she said with joy. "The dull moment, I don't mean to offend, but that sounds." Kyoka sighed angrily. "Not boring, as in an interesting." "It's okay," he said, making an understanding sound and apologizing with a regretful expression. "Dole is in, doling out moments people remember. I wouldn't expect you to know them anyway, since they're not very popular with the younger generations." Kyoka followed as he dragged the trash out the front door and threw it in the trash can. "Well, thank you for all your help, Jiro, I really appreciate it." Izuku had decided to forego wearing his diadem in order to avoid needless attention, and he was now wearing sandals after they had decided to throw away his socks and shoe. "No issue." Izuku shifted around as if he had something to say. "Thanks for helping me clean up, dude." "What's up?" Quote. "All right, could I get your number?" She pondered whether she could cook an egg on his cheek since she could see the heat radiating off of him. "What, can't get it from your mom?" she teased. Quote. "No, I can't," he said, making a sound of prolonged pain. "I would perish." "All right, fair enough." Before she could move, he tapped her shoulder and said, "Let me quickly grab a piece of paper." He gave her a kind smile and said, "Oh, or I could use my journal," but she thought he was making fun of her. She gave him her number in a flash, stood, and waited. "Good point. All right, in about an hour, I'll go get my notes and bring them over." He bravely waved at her from the sidewalk. "No, I'm joining you." In an instant, she was at his side, walking forward with assurance. "What if my mother notices you? I would never get over that." He appeared resigned already, and his posture sagged. "Well, I'm willing to take the chance. In any case, you're going to clear up that entire misunderstanding, right? She had a sickly sweet smile. Obviously, he squeaked and became rigid. Then I can follow along without any problems. Is there a weeping willow? Seeing his hair fresh from the shower gave her the idea for that nickname, but she had to admit that he cleaned up nicely after he washed off and put on some appropriate clothes. He said, let me guess, it's the hair, more than he actually asked. She made a joke, you're pretty smart for a vegetable. She was almost impressed when he easily avoided the half-hearted swipe that followed from her jack, saying, why you too? After all, what other vegetable can turn up to some tunes? The stab that followed, however, was much less easy to dodge, and he didn't even bother trying. Ouch, I probably deserved that one, he said, laughing and massaging his arm. Izuku's voice filled the 20-minute walk to the apartment. Kyoka had casually mentioned something about Gang Orca early on, while discussing whatever was on her mind, and she hardly spoke ever again, but it was interesting to see how true the nickname she had given him was. He was definitely a uber-hero nerd. They climbed 4 flights of stairs and arrived at the edge of the house, Midoriya. Izuku put a finger to his lips and found an extra key under the doormat, then quietly turned the lock and slowly pushed the door inward, signaling Kyoka to stay outside before sneaking in like a small-time burglar a minute later, holding notes. Is that you, Izuku? His face went blue as he rushed to shove the notes into Kyoka's hands. Izuku, you're there, I see. Honey, why did you enter without saying anything? He had just managed to hand the package off when Inko stepped into Kyoka's sight line. Is that the person I believe it to be? Quote. Mom, hold on. Let's take our time. Inko practically teleported to the doorway, and he was immediately ignored. And she's really gorgeous. Kyoka flushed and stood motionless in shock as Inko started crying uncontrollably. Mom, Izuku moaned, will you please wait inside? Izuku looked so defeated that Kyoka began snickering behind a raised hand when he caught her eye. He let out a painful breath and went outside, closing the door behind him. I'll be just a moment. Exam notes go clear through page 40, but after that it's just some unimportant hero stuff, Kyoka said, glancing sideways at the door as he looked over the notebook he had given her. Got it. She opened it to look inside and was astounded by what she saw right away. Damn, not bad, Midoriya. When a particularly loud sob entered the room, he looked worried and said, thanks, and I'll text you later once I get a new phone. He was clearly trying to get her to leave quickly, but she still had one more question. Midoriya. You're going in another instance, aren't you? She asked with an expression that was unusually serious. He immediately became serious and waited for her to ask it. Quote. He took a step toward her and whispered, I must, nodding. I'm not powerful. It's okay, she said, holding up a hand. I don't need you to defend it. I understand. She fumbled with the notebook in her hands and lifted her eyes to meet his. Just be safe. She patted his chest and paused, but she didn't spare her thoughts. And if you can, I want to see what it looks like. He looked at her bewildered and scared. An instance, I mean. She sighed and let her arms drop to her sides. It's not that I don't trust you, she said. I can only imagine how difficult it is to go through it all on your own, so if I can share some of the burden and maybe help with ideas or something, I want to do it. Are you requesting that I record this? She nodded, but he sounded doubtful at best. I am. He reluctantly nodded slowly in response. Look, just consider it. I assure you that I have no doubts about you, it's just. When you ask me, what kind of hero does that? I got that look, you know, she said, helplessly waving her arms. It was awful, and I hope to never see it again. So let me assist you, please. I'll always be by your side. Izuku wiped his sparkling eyes and shook his head. All right. He looked her in the eyes and said, you're sure? I should be able to do it when I get back from the exam. Without hesitation, she gave him a fierce nod before moving forward to give him a brief embrace. All right, let's talk later. Grinning, she backed up and placed her arms behind her back. All right, I'll speak with you later. Goodbye, Jiro, he said, his cheeks flushed. Bye, broccoli boy. She quickly returned home after descending the 4 flights of stairs, opened her room door, and then walked forward, laying face down on her bed and letting out a deep sigh. What a day. It wasn't a bad day, but it was definitely a day.
This was it for the series. I hope you enjoyed it. To watch more series like this, subscribe to my channel. Till then, bye bye.